My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a project estimator for a mid-sized construction company in Fort Worth, Texas. My life runs on structure. Early mornings, clean numbers, clear outcomes. In construction, if you miss something small, it doesn't stay small. It turns into a cost you can't ignore. I used to believe relationships worked the same way. I was wrong. Adrian Cole is 31, my boyfriend. Or he was. We had been together a little over 3 years, engaged for 8 months. For most of the last year, he had been living in my house. The house is mine. I bought it before we met. That detail mattered more than I realized at the time. On the surface, Adrian made sense, confident, social, the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately control the energy. He called it charisma. Looking back, it was something else. Adrian had a way of saying things that sounded harmless until you paid attention. He liked to call it honesty. I started noticing the patterns slowly. Little comments about my job being predictable. Jokes about how estimating was just guessing with a calculator. Corrections in front of friends that didn't add anything except shifting attention back to him. Never enough to start a real argument, just enough to make me pause. And then there was Paula, his ex-girlfriend. According to Adrian, she was immature, dramatic, and a mistake he had outgrown. But her name showed up more often than it should have. Paula used to plan better dates. Paula had better instincts. Paula understood him in ways I didn't. If I reacted, he would smile slightly and say, "You're overthinking it, Claire." I let that go longer than I should have. Most things stayed small until that Friday. It started like any other night. A few friends over. Drinks. Takeout. Nothing complicated. Adrian liked hosting when he could control the atmosphere. In my house, open space, clean layout made that easy. By around 10, everyone had settled into that comfortable rhythm, conversations splitting between the kitchen and living room. I was at the counter talking to Eric about a roofing bid when Adrian walked in, glass of wine in hand. He had that look, the one that meant he was about to say something he thought would land. At first, I ignored it. He leaned against the counter, listening for a minute. Then he smiled. Tight. Controlled. Construction people take themselves way too seriously, he said lightly. For a job that's basically guessing numbers. Eric let out a short laugh. I didn't react. I'd call it educated guessing, I said calmly. Math helps. That should have been the end of it. Usually, that's where it ends. But Adrian wasn't finished. He swirled his wine slowly. If we're talking about guessing, he said, I've got something more interesting. That shifted the attention. Eric looked at him. Oh? Adrian turned his head slightly and looked directly at me. My ex, he said casually, asked me to marry her this week. For a second, I thought I misheard him. Eric blinked. Wait, before Claire? Adrian shook his head. No, he said. This week. The air changed. Not loudly, but completely. I felt it before I processed it. I looked at him. What do you mean? He took a sip of his wine like nothing was wrong. Paula called, he said. Said she made a mistake. Said I was the one. Eric shifted his weight slightly. Waiting. We all were. I kept my voice even. And? Adrian smiled. That same tight smile. I said yes. Silence. Not dramatic. Just total. Like the room didn't know how to move forward. I heard someone behind us stop talking mid-sentence. I looked at him. Say that again? He didn't hesitate. I accepted, he said, like he was explaining something obvious. No apology. No hesitation. Just amusement. Something in my chest went very still. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. I looked around the kitchen. Everyone was pretending not to listen, but no one was speaking. So I handled the first problem. I stepped into the living room. Hey, I said evenly. We're going to call it a night. A few people looked up. Something came up. I need the house. No one argued. They could feel it. Jackets were grabbed, quick goodbyes, avoided eye contact. Eric gave me a look on his way out. Not questioning, just understanding. Within minutes, the house was empty. The door closed. Silence. I walked back into the kitchen. Adrian was still standing there, like nothing had happened, like the night had just paused. I looked at him. "Go upstairs," I said. "Start packing." He frowned slightly. "Excuse me?" I didn't raise my voice. "If you accepted a proposal from someone else," I said, "you're not staying here." For the first time that night, his expression changed. Just slightly. Then he laughed. Short. Dismissive. "Claire, relax," he said. "It was a joke." I didn't respond. "You're overreacting," he added. "This is exactly what I mean. You take everything too seriously." I held his gaze. "Pack your things." His arms crossed. "You're ending 3 years over a joke?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm ending it because my fiancé told another woman yes and thought it was funny." That landed, not loudly, but directly. He tried to pivot. "You're twisting this." I didn't engage. "The house is mine," I said. "You need to leave tonight." He stood there, waiting for me to soften, to argue, to give him something to work with. I didn't. And that's when it happened. The shift. The confidence in his posture slipped just enough. He realized I wasn't negotiating. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked upstairs. 40 minutes later, I heard drawers opening, closet doors sliding, movement, controlled, faster than usual. When he came back down, he had 2 bags. His expression was different now, still irritated, but quieter. "I'm leaving," he said. "You'll regret this." "I'm already calm," I replied. He stood there for a second, like he expected something. A pause. A change. There wasn't one. So he picked up his bags, walked out. The door closed behind him. And just like that, it was over. I locked the door, turned off the kitchen lights, and went to bed earlier than usual. What I didn't realize was that whatever he thought he had with Paula was about to collapse. And when it did, he would come back. The house felt different the next morning. Not empty, quiet. There's a difference. Empty feels like something is missing. Quiet feels like something unnecessary is finally gone. I woke up at the same time I always did. Coffee, emails, job site notes, numbers waiting to be checked. Nothing in my routine changed, except the tension. It wasn't there anymore. No second guessing what I would walk into at the end of the day. No offhand comments disguised as jokes. No comparisons I didn't ask for. Just stillness. That first week, I handled everything the same way I handle work problems. Systematically. I packed the rest of Adrian's things that were still in the house. Clothes he left behind. A few kitchen items he insisted we needed. Small decorations that never really matched anything. I boxed everything neatly, labeled it. Stacked it in the garage. No drama. No hesitation. The logistics were simple. The house was mine. No shared lease, no joint ownership, no complicated accounts. Just a clean separation. Emotionally, I expected something heavier, a delay, some kind of aftershock. But what I felt instead was clarity. Once you see something clearly, there isn't much left to process. You just adjust. A couple of friends reached out, carefully, testing the situation. I gave them the same version every time. Adrian accepted another woman's proposal, then announced it in my kitchen like it was entertainment. That was enough. Most people didn't ask follow-up questions. They didn't need to. By the end of the second week, the silence started to feel intentional. Not from me, from him. Adrian was not the type to stay quiet. He liked control, attention, the last word, even when he was wrong, especially when he was wrong. So the absence of anything, no messages, no calls, no late night attempts to restart the conversation, that stood out. I noticed it, and I filed it away because people don't change patterns without a reason. There's always something behind it. 2 weeks. Exactly. It was a Tuesday. I had just gotten home from work, set my bag down on the kitchen counter. Same place as always. And then my phone lit up. His name. Adrian. The first message in 14 days. I didn't pick it up immediately. I looked at it. Let it sit there for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I opened it. Can we talk? That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just careful wording. Not, we need to fix this. Not, you overreacted. Not even his usual tone. Just controlled. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Something had shifted. I didn't respond. I set my phone back down, unpacked my work bag, plugged in my laptop. Routine first. Always. 30 seconds later, another message. Long. I know things ended badly. I've been thinking a lot. I made a mistake. I miss what we had. Can we talk in person? I read it once. Then again, not for the words, for the pacing. What he chose to say first and what he didn't. There was no mention of Paula. Not yet. That was intentional. I leaned against the counter slightly, thinking. In construction, when something shifts suddenly, you don't look at the surface. You look at the support underneath. 5 minutes passed. Another message. I owe you an explanation. That part stood out. Not an apology. An explanation. That told me where his head was. He still thought this was something he could explain his way out of. I picked up my phone. Typed one question. What happened with Paula? I didn't add anything else. No emotion. No context. Just that. The reply came almost immediately. Too fast. Like he had been waiting. Things weren't what they seemed. I almost smiled at that. That sentence. It always means the same thing. Something collapsed. I didn't respond right away. I let him keep going. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a full message. She wasn't honest with me. I found out after everything. There was someone else. There it was. Simple. Predictable. But I kept reading. She told me she was ready to start over, that she had changed. We talked about moving in together. Of course they did. People always talk about the future when they're trying to sell something unstable. Then about a week in, I found out she'd been seeing someone the whole time. Not casually, like seriously. He thought they were together. I didn't react, didn't interrupt, just read. She messaged me directly, asked why I was texting her boyfriend. That was the moment everything fell apart for him. I could see it clearly. No guesswork needed. He finished with, I made a mistake, Claire. I should have appreciated what we had. Can we talk? There it was again. The return. Not because he understood. Because the alternative failed. I set my phone down. Looked around the kitchen. Same place. Same lighting. Same counter where everything had shifted 2 weeks ago. Only now, the roles were different. Back then, he stood there, confident, certain. Now, he was asking, carefully, waiting. I thought about it for a minute. Not because I was unsure, that decision had already been made, but because I wanted to understand something. I wanted to hear how he would explain it out loud, what version of the story he believed would work. So instead of texting back, I called him. He answered on the first ring, like he had been holding the phone, waiting. Claire, he said quickly, I'm glad you called. His voice, different. Still controlled, but softer. Measured. I want to explain everything properly, he added. Of course you do, I thought. I didn't interrupt. Paula reached out, he began. She apologized for how things ended years ago. Said she realized I was the one she should have chosen. I leaned slightly against the counter, listening, not reacting. She caught me off guard, he continued. And when she asked me to marry her, I said yes, without thinking. Without thinking. I let that sit. He kept going. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, he said. I just wanted to see if she was serious. There it was. The first attempt at reframing, testing, not choosing. I said nothing. Silence does something interesting. It makes people feel it. And after I left your place, he continued quickly, I thought maybe there was something there. So I gave it a chance. Of course you did. For about a week, it seemed right, he added. Then his voice shifted slightly, tighter, until everything came out. I could hear it now. the part he couldn't control. She was seeing someone else the whole time, he said. Neither of us knew. When it came out, it ended fast. I let him finish. No interruptions. No reactions, just listening. Because by the time he stopped talking, I already knew exactly what this conversation was going to be. When he stopped talking, the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt complete, like everything that needed to be revealed had already surfaced. I get it now, Adrian said after a few seconds, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I messed up. I didn't respond. I should have handled it differently, he added. I wasn't thinking clearly. Still nothing from me. That's when his tone shifted again, slightly more urgent. I miss what we had, Claire. There it was. Not subtle anymore. I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice even. What exactly do you miss? He paused. Not long, just long enough to think. The stability, he said. The way things worked. Us. Us. I leaned against the counter, eyes drifting to the same spot where he had stood 2 weeks ago. The same place he smiled when he told me he accepted another woman's proposal. You had that, I said calmly. I know, he replied quickly, and I took it for granted. I can admit that. Admit. Not understand. Not yet. And Paula? I asked. A small pause. That's over, he said. Completely. Why? Another pause. Because that question matters more than anything else. Because she lied, he said. Because she wasn't who I thought she was. I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. That's not what I asked. Silence. Longer this time. I let it stretch. Because this was the moment. The one that tells you whether someone is actually seeing the truth or just reacting to consequences. Finally, he exhaled. Because it fell apart, he admitted. There it was. Simple. Honest, accidental, not because he chose to leave, because he had nowhere left to stay. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of emotion, out of confirmation. Everything lined up. Every pattern. Every small moment I had ignored. Every comparison. Every joke. Every shift in tone. It all led here. You didn't leave her, I said quietly. It ended. That's not, he started. I cut him off. You didn't come back because you understood what you did, I continued. You came back because it didn't work out. That's not fair, Claire. His voice tightened. I told you I made a mistake. I opened my eyes. You did, I said. Just not the one you think. Silence again. This time heavier. I want to fix this, he said, softer now. We don't have to go back to how things were. We can take it slow. Start over. Start over. Like nothing happened. Like decisions didn't have weight. Like consequences were optional. I pushed off the counter and walked slowly toward the window. Outside, everything looked normal. Cars passing. Lights turning on in neighboring houses. Nothing in the world had changed. Except this. Do you remember what you said that night? I asked. A pause. About what? In my kitchen. Another pause. Longer. I was joking, Claire. Of course. I said yes, he added, but it wasn't real. I turned slightly, my voice still steady. You didn't hesitate. He didn't respond. You didn't correct yourself. Silence. You didn't look at me and say, I'm kidding. Nothing. You looked at me, I continued, and waited for a reaction. His breathing shifted slightly on the other end. That part, he remembered. You wanted attention, I said. And you got it. That's not... You made a decision, I cut in, sharper this time. Twice. He went quiet. First, when you said yes to her, I said. And second, when you told me like it was something funny. I didn't think you'd... That's the problem. I didn't raise my voice. But the words landed harder. You didn't think. Silence. The kind that doesn't try to argue anymore. Just listens. You thought you had something better, I continued. So you treated what you had like it didn't matter. That's not true, he said quickly. Then why did you say yes? He opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing came out. I didn't fill the silence this time. I let it sit. Because there isn't always an answer. Sometimes there's just exposure. I was caught off guard, he said finally. She said everything I wanted to hear. It got in my head. There it was. Not love. not confusion. Validation. He chose the version of himself he liked better. And for a moment, he believed it. And I didn't? I asked quietly. That's not what I meant. But it's what happened. His breathing slowed. Careful now. Measured. Like he was trying to step through something unstable. I'm here now, he said. Doesn't that count for something? I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. That's exactly the problem, I said. A beat. You think coming back is what matters. Silence. It's not. I walked back toward the counter, resting my hand lightly against it. Grounded. Certain. What matters is why you left, I said. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Not in a way that would change anything. And the reason you left, I continued, is because you believed something else was better. That's not how I see it. It doesn't matter how you see it now. The words came faster now. Shorter. Clearer. It matters what you did when you had the choice. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Full of everything he couldn't argue with. I said I was wrong, he tried again. What else do you want me to say? I took a breath. Slow. Controlled. Nothing, I said. And that's when he finally understood. Not fully, but enough. Because the next thing he said was different. So that's it? No confidence. No control. Just a question. For the first time, he didn't know the outcome, and he was waiting for me to decide it. Yes, I said. I didn't hesitate. I didn't soften it. Just, yes. The word sat there between us. Final. He didn't speak right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slower now, like he was trying to process something that didn't fit the version of reality he expected. That's it? He repeated, quieter this time. Yes. Another pause. Longer. He was searching for something, an angle, a way back in, a sentence that could shift the direction. I'm trying to fix this, he said finally. Doesn't that matter to you at all? I leaned slightly against the counter, steady. No, I said. That landed harder than anything else. Not loud. Not emotional. Just absolute. You don't mean that, he said quickly. Claire, we had 3 years together. I know. Trips, holidays, plans. We were engaged. I know. Then how can you just... He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. How can you just throw that away? I let the silence sit for a second before answering. I didn't. He froze on the other end. You did, I continued. That's not fair, he snapped, the edge creeping back into his voice. I made a mistake. I admitted it. You made a choice. The interruption was clean, precise. No, he pushed back. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Silence again. But this time, it felt tighter, pressed. Like something was starting to crack. You don't say yes to someone else, I said, each word measured, unless part of you believes it's an option. I told you, I didn't mean it like that. And then you tried it. That stopped him. Completely. No response. No quick defense. Because there wasn't one. You left my house, I continued, and instead of realizing what you'd done, you went to see if it would work. His breathing shifted again. Faster now. You gave it a week, I said. That's not confusion. That's a decision. I thought, he started, then stopped. Exactly. You thought you had something better, I said. That's not... And when it failed, I finished. You came back. The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It wasn't argumentative. It was exposed. For the first time since the call started, he had nothing to reshape, nothing to reframe, just the truth. That's not why I called you, he said finally, but the confidence was gone. It is, I replied. No. You didn't call me the day after you left. He didn't answer. You didn't call me when you started talking to her seriously. Nothing. You called me when it collapsed. A breath. Sharp. Unsteady. That's timing, I said, not growth. He exhaled slowly, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping out of his control. You're making this into something bigger than it is, he said, quieter now. People make mistakes. They work through them. I shook my head slightly, even though he couldn't see it. This isn't about a mistake. Then what is it about? I let the answer sit for a second, because this was the part that mattered. It's about position, I said. A pause. What? You changed mine. Silence. When you said yes to her, I continued, you decided I was optional. That's not what It doesn't matter what you intended, I cut in. It matters what you showed. He didn't speak, because he understood that part, even if he didn't want to admit it. You turned a relationship into a comparison, I said. And then you made your choice. I chose wrong, he said quickly. I'm telling you that now. That's the problem. Another pause. He didn't interrupt this time. You only know it was wrong, I said, because it failed. His breathing slowed again. Careful. Measured. Like he was stepping through something fragile. If it had worked, I added quietly, you wouldn't be calling me. Silence. Long. Heavy. Honest. That was the moment it fully landed. Not emotionally. Logically. And logic is harder to argue with. That's not fair, he said again, but weaker this time. It is. I straightened slightly. Grounded. Certain. You don't get to test another option, I said, while expecting this one to stay in place. I wasn't testing. You were. Flat. Unmoved. And even if you weren't, I added, that makes it worse. He didn't respond, because there was nowhere left to go. So what, that's it? He asked again, but now it sounded different. Not frustrated. Not defensive. Just empty. Yes. The word came easier this time. Cleaner. What if we start over? He tried one last time. No engagement, no pressure, just talk. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was considering it, because I already knew the answer. You're still not hearing it, I said. A pause. What? This isn't something we rebuild. Silence. It's something you ended. Another breath. Slow. Controlled. And then nothing. No argument. No interruption. Just the quiet realization settling in that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an ending. I thought you'd calm down, he said after a while, almost to himself. That one line, more than anything else, said everything. I opened my eyes. That was your mistake. He didn't reply, because he knew it was true. I'm not waiting, I said. No emotion. No anger. Just clarity. A long pause followed. And then, okay. Quiet. Resigned. Not acceptance, but recognition that there was nothing left to negotiate. I didn't say anything else. Neither did he. After a few seconds, I ended the call. No goodbye. No hesitation. Just done. After I ended the call, I didn't move right away. The phone stayed in my hand for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I set it down on the counter. Same place, same angle. Everything about the room looked exactly the same, but the weight of it gone. I opened my settings, blocked his number. No hesitation, no second thought. Then I removed him from everything else. Messages, social media, email, every door closed. If something is meant to end, you don't leave openings for it to come back. The next morning, my alarm went off at the usual time. I got up, made coffee, checked my schedule, same routine. Only now, there was nothing underneath it. No tension waiting to surface. No conversations looping in the back of my mind. Just quiet. Real quiet. The kind that doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. A few friends reached out over the next couple of weeks, carefully, testing the version of the story they had heard. Apparently, Adrian had been telling people we had a misunderstanding, that I wasn't willing to talk. I didn't correct him. Not directly. When someone asked me what happened, I told them once. Adrian accepted another woman's proposal and announced it in my kitchen. That was enough. No one asked for clarification after that. About a month later, I heard the rest. Through a mutual friend, Adrian and Paula. It hadn't just ended. It collapsed. The other man she had been seeing found out. Messages were compared. screenshots shared, different versions of the same story laid side by side. And once that happens, there's no way to hold anything together. From what I was told, it turned into exactly what you'd expect. Arguments. Accusations, both of them realizing they weren't the only one. In the end, neither of them stayed. He didn't just lose me. He lost the option he thought he was upgrading to. When I heard that, I didn't feel anything dramatic. No satisfaction, no anger, just confirmation. Because outcomes like that, they're predictable. What stayed with me wasn't the situation itself. It was something else my friend mentioned. He said Adrian thought I would call him eventually. That I would calm down, that after a few weeks, I would reach out, because 3 years should mean something, because an engagement should hold weight, because stability should be enough to keep someone in place. That assumption was the biggest mistake he made. Not saying yes to Paula, not leaving my house, not even coming back. It was believing I would still be there after, that I would stay in the same position while he tested another one. Months passed. Life moved forward the way it always does, gradually, quietly. My mornings stayed early. Job sites, estimates, numbers that made sense. Evenings at home without noise, without commentary, without comparison. I had more space than I realized I had been missing. Not physically, mentally. And once you notice that, you don't give it back. Every now and then, someone would ask me the same question. Do you regret ending it so quickly? I always answered the same way. No, because it wasn't quick. It was clear. What Adrian did wasn't a joke. It wasn't confusion, it was a decision. Actually, 2. The first, when he said yes to someone else. The second, when he stood in my kitchen and treated it like entertainment. That kind of thing doesn't come out of nowhere. It reflects how someone sees you, your position, your value. If I had stayed, if I had argued, negotiated, tried to compete, the outcome would have been different. Not better, just delayed. Instead, I made one decision, and I didn't move from it. He left believing he had something better. When that fell apart, he expected what he left behind to still be there. It wasn't. That's the part people misunderstand. You don't get to step out of something solid just to see what else is available, and then step back in like nothing changed. Because something always changes. Position, respect, clarity. In my case, the relationship ended the moment he said yes to someone else. Everything after that was just the consequence catching up. And honestly, that kind of clarity makes moving on easier than most endings. No confusion, no lingering questions, just a clean line. And once you see it, you don't cross back over. My name is Scarlett Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and I work in IT support for a mid-sized logistics company just outside Columbus. My life runs on structure, clean schedules, predictable routines, problems that can be broken down, analyzed, and solved. I've always believed relationships should work the same way. If something starts to shift, even slightly, you notice it early. You adjust. You fix it before it turns into something permanent. I was wrong. Daniel Carter is 27, my boyfriend. Or he was. We've been together for a little over 2 years. Not living together, but close enough that my apartment felt like ours most nights. Shared dinners, shared laundry, shared routines that blurred the line between independence and permanence. On the surface, it worked. Daniel was intense in a way I used to interpret as confidence. Loud, competitive, always needing to win, even in conversations that didn't require a winner. Sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it felt like I was being measured without realizing it. I ignored that feeling. I told myself it was just his personality. I had been planning to propose this spring. Nothing dramatic, just a small gathering at a brewery we both liked. A few friends, his older sister, then something quiet outside by the Riverwalk. I didn't want a spectacle. Daniel did. He kept hinting about it, joking about making it memorable, wanting people there, wanting reactions. So I compromised. I booked the space, coordinated with his best friend, Even asked Daniel what kind of ring he liked. He sent me links, precise ones, like it was a request form. Last week, everything shifted. I got home early. My manager let us leave after finishing a rollout ahead of schedule. Daniel wasn't expecting me. His car was outside. I could hear voices through the door. I assumed his friend was over. That wasn't unusual. So I walked in quietly, the way I always do when someone's on a call. They were in my kitchen. Daniel had his back to the hallway. His friend, Lena, was facing it. She saw me first. Her expression froze. Daniel didn't notice. He was leaning against the counter, drinking from my glass like he owned the space. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Watch me say no and make her cry." He said it casually, like it was a line he'd already rehearsed. Lena gave a small, uncertain laugh, the kind people use when they don't know if something is actually funny. Daniel kept going, faster, energized. He talked about inviting everyone, about how perfect it would be, about how he wanted a full audience. He even mentioned inviting his ex-girlfriend, the one he always said didn't matter anymore, the one who still liked his posts at midnight, the one he swore was just history. I stood there long enough to hear my own proposal turned into entertainment. Then I stepped back, quietly, because I needed a second to think without them seeing my face. I didn't confront him. I didn't walk in and demand answers. I left. Back down the hallway, out of the building, into my car. I sat there for 15 minutes, just replaying it carefully. Watch me say no and make her cry. Not uncertainty. Not hesitation. Performance. That was the word that stuck. He wasn't unsure about marrying me. He was excited about humiliating me. When I went back upstairs, I made noise with my keys, enough that they'd know I was home. Daniel walked out smiling like nothing had happened, kissed my cheek, asked why I was early. Lena wouldn't look at me. I said my manager let us off early. I acted normal. I'm good at that when I need to be. Daniel asked if I was still planning the brewery thing. I said yes, unless something had changed. He smirked, said nothing had changed. Just wanted to make sure it was special. That word didn't feel the same anymore. That night, he fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I went through everything logically, step by step. First, he knew I was going to propose. I hadn't said it outright, but it was obvious. Second, he knew details, too many details, which meant he had either guessed perfectly or accessed something he shouldn't have. Third, he mentioned inviting his ex, specifically, not casually, deliberately. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I checked something simple. I logged into the brewery booking portal. The confirmation email had been opened earlier that week. I hadn't opened it. That meant someone else had. Daniel had my laptop password. I never thought I needed to hide it. The next morning, I tested something small, controlled. I told him I might need to move the event to another weekend. Work conflict. His reaction was immediate. Too immediate. No, that weekend's perfect. Firm. Final. Like he had already built something around that date. That was the moment clarity replaced confusion. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't misinterpreting a joke. I was being set up. And the only question left was simple. Would I walk into it or rewrite it? I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was emotional, because I was thinking. There's a difference. By morning, the shock had settled into something quieter, sharper, cleaner. Daniel wasn't confused. He wasn't unsure. He had a plan, and he was proud enough of it to tell other people. That part mattered more than anything, because it meant this wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. So I treated it like I would any other problem. I verified. I gathered information, and I stopped reacting emotionally. First, I confirmed the guest list. I texted Lena separately, kept my tone casual. I said I wanted to make sure everyone important to Daniel was included for the brewery night. There was a pause before she replied, long enough to tell me she was thinking carefully. Then she listed names, his usual circle, his sister, a few mutual friends, and then his ex. She added a laughing emoji, said Daniel thought it would be iconic. That word again. Not meaningful. Not emotional. Performative. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. Not because I was hurt, because I was recalibrating. This wasn't about a relationship anymore. It was about control of a narrative, and I wasn't going to let mine be written by someone who saw me as a punchline. Second, I adjusted the plan, not dramatically, not visibly, just enough. I kept the brewery, kept the date he was so protective of, but I called the manager, asked if I could switch from the open patio to a smaller, private room. I said it was for a more intimate moment. He agreed. No hesitation. Then I asked something else. If I could connect my laptop to their TV, he said yes, as long as it was appropriate. I told him it would be. That was the moment the plan stopped being reactive and became deliberate. I wasn't going to confront Daniel with accusations. I wasn't going to argue in circles. I was going to show the truth. Exactly as it was. Nothing exaggerated, nothing distorted, just clear, unavoidable. I started gathering what I needed. Not everything, just enough. The confirmation email he had opened, the timestamp, the access point. Then I checked something I hadn't thought about before. Months ago, Daniel had logged into his Instagram on my tablet. He never logged out. I hadn't touched it. Until now. I didn't scroll endlessly. I didn't dig through years of history. I focused on the last few weeks, the ones surrounding the event. And there it was, a message to his ex. You better not miss this. Followed by, it's going to be hilarious. No context needed. No interpretation required. I took a screenshot. Closed the app. Didn't go back. That was enough. Later that evening, I tested one more thing. We were sitting on the couch, TV on, half watching something neither of us cared about. Daniel leaned back, scrolling on his phone. Then he said, almost casually, "You ever notice how public proposals can go really wrong?" I turned my head slightly. Wrong how? He smirked. Like, imagine someone says no in front of everyone. He chuckled. Brutal. Then, after a second, but kind of amazing to watch, I didn't react, outwardly. But I reached for my phone, tapped record, held it low. Let him keep talking. He didn't notice. Why would he? He thought he was in control. He thought I was still following the script he had written. By the end of that conversation, I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt clear. Like a system that finally identifies the error after running inefficiently for too long. The week leading up to the event felt strange. Daniel was in a good mood, not warm, not affectionate, charged, like he was anticipating something. He kept making comments about how excited he was for everyone to be there, about how it was going to be memorable. He bought a new shirt, mentioned it twice. Once casually, once while looking directly at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. I treated him normally. Went to work, came home, cooked dinner, went to the gym. If he noticed the shift in me, he didn't say anything. A few times he asked if I was nervous. I told him I was focused on logistics. That answer seemed to disappoint him. I think he wanted to see anxiety, something he could use later. 2 days before the event, I finalized everything. I brought my laptop to the brewery early, tested the connection to the screen. The manager showed me how to switch inputs quickly. One button. That was all it would take. I kept the presentation simple. No music. No dramatic effects, just facts, screenshots, timestamps, and one final slide. A single sentence, clear, direct. I also made one more decision, quiet, practical. I returned the ring. No announcement, no symbolism, just logic. There was no future here, no reason to keep something that represented one. The jeweler processed it without questions. Within policy. Clean. Final. The day of the event, Daniel insisted on arriving separately. He said he wanted to come with Lena. Said it would make the moment feel more real, more surprising. That confirmed everything. He didn't just want to reject me. He wanted to watch it happen. I arrived early. Greeted guests as they came in, watched their faces, Listen to their tone. They were excited. Genuinely. They weren't expecting cruelty. They were expecting something real. That mattered. Because it meant Daniel hadn't told everyone. Just enough people to enjoy the performance. Not enough to risk being judged. His ex arrived 10 minutes later. Confident. Comfortable. Like she knew she belonged there. She smiled at me. Polite. Neutral. But there was something behind it. Recognition. Not of me. Of the situation. Daniel walked in right after her, laughing at something she said. Too loud. Too easy. He kissed my cheek, leaned close, and whispered, "Don't back out." I looked at him, smiled. "I won't." And for the first time all week, that was completely true. Once everyone had a drink in their hands, the room settled into that familiar pre-celebration energy. Soft laughter, phones ready, conversations half finished because people were waiting for something bigger to start. I stood near the center of the room and thanked everyone for coming, kept my tone light, controlled, normal. Daniel was watching me closely, not warmly, intently, like he was waiting for a cue, for me to step into the version of the night he had already imagined. His ex stood a little off to the side, but not far, close enough to be included, close enough to see everything clearly. At one point, Daniel reached for her wrist briefly while laughing at something she said. Small. Quick, but deliberate, I noticed. I didn't react. A few people cheered when I mentioned I had planned something important. Someone raised their phone, started recording. Daniel's smile widened. He leaned back slightly, like he was settling in to watch. That was the moment I felt it. Not fear. Not hesitation. Clarity. This wasn't a relationship anymore. It was a stage, and I was done playing the role he wrote for me. Instead of moving toward him, instead of reaching into my pocket, instead of doing exactly what he expected, I turned, walked to the TV, connected my laptop. There was a brief pause behind me, confused laughter. Someone said, "Oh, this is new." Daniel's expression flickered, just slightly, not concern. Not yet, just recalculation. I picked up the remote, switched the input. The screen lit up, plain. No music, no build-up. Just the first slide. A screenshot of the brewery reservation. Date, time, clear. "I booked this a few weeks ago," I said calmly, "because I thought tonight would mark the beginning of something permanent." A few smiles, a few nods. They still thought this was part of the BDK. Daniel relaxed again. Just a little. The second slide appeared. The same confirmation email, marked as opened, timestamp visible. "I hadn't accessed this since I booked it," I continued. So I checked. Silence started to replace the background noise. Not heavy yet, but noticeable. Daniel shifted his weight, crossed his arms. The third slide came up. A message. Simple. Direct. "You better not miss this. It's going to be hilarious." No name needed. No explanation required. I didn't add anything. I just read it exactly as it was. The room changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once, but enough. Phones lowered. People looked at each other, trying to understand. Daniel let out a short laugh. Too quick. Too controlled. "Scarlett," he said, "what is this?" I didn't answer him. I moved to the next piece. I picked up my phone, pressed play. His voice filled the room. Clear. Unmistakable. Imagine someone saying no in front of everyone. That would be brutal, but kind of amazing. No one spoke. No one laughed. The silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was recognition. Daniel stepped forward. "That's out of context," he said quickly. "You're twisting." I held up my hand. Not aggressively, just enough. "I'll let you explain in a moment." My tone didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't invite argument. It just held. He stopped talking. Not because he agreed, because the room had already shifted, because people were no longer looking at him the same way. I turned back to the screen. paused for a second, then said the one thing I had replayed in my head all week. You told Lena you wanted to watch me say no and make me cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't emphasize it. I just said it, exactly as I had heard it. The impact didn't come from volume. It came from accuracy. Daniel's face changed, subtly. The confidence didn't disappear, but it fractured. Just enough to show what was underneath. His first instinct was speed. You're taking that completely out of... Then clarify it, I said, still calm, still steady. He opened his mouth, paused, closed it again. Because there wasn't a version of that sentence that sounded better when explained. He pivoted, faster now, more defensive. Everyone jokes about stuff like this, he said. You're overreacting. There it was. Minimization, predictable, familiar. The same tone he used when conversations didn't go his way. I didn't argue, didn't interrupt. I let him speak. 10 seconds, maybe less. Then I asked one question. If it was a joke, why did you insist I keep this exact date? Silence. He blinked. Once. Twice. I didn't give him time to recover. And why did you invite her? I nodded slightly toward his ex. She shifted uncomfortably, for the first time since she arrived. The room felt smaller, tighter. Daniel exhaled sharply. She's just a friend. Automatic. Rehearsed. But weaker now, because it didn't match what people had just seen, what they had just heard, what they were now piecing together on their own. His ex looked down, didn't defend him, didn't support him, just avoided eye contact. That said more than anything she could have said out loud. From the side of the room, Lena finally spoke, quiet, but clear. He told me it would be funny, she said. No one moved. No one interrupted. The word hung there, funny. Not misunderstanding, not fear, not hesitation, funny. Daniel turned toward her immediately. Are you serious right now? The sharpness was back. The deflection. The attempt to redirect, but it was too late. Because now it wasn't just me. It wasn't just evidence. It was confirmation from someone he trusted. I stepped forward slightly. Not toward him, toward the center of the room. I planned tonight because I believed we were building something real, I said. My voice didn't waver. I'm not perfect, but I don't treat commitment like entertainment. No one interrupted. No one disagreed. If you had doubts, we could have talked about them privately. I paused. Just long enough. What I overheard wasn't doubt. I let the silence carry the rest. It was planning. That was the moment everything fully shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. Because now there was no version of the story left that he could control. And for the first time that night, Daniel wasn't performing anymore. He was exposed. Daniel's composure didn't break all at once. It cracked in layers. First, the confidence slipped, then the rhythm of his voice, then the control. You're embarrassing me right now, he said, sharper this time. You could have talked to me privately. That almost worked. Almost. Because if you ignored everything that came before, it sounded reasonable. But the room remembered. The screenshots, the audio, the word funny still hanging in the air. I tilted my head slightly. If you had doubts, I said evenly, a private conversation would have made sense. I let a small pause settle. But you didn't plan a private conversation. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. You planned a performance. No one spoke. But people shifted, subtly. A few of his friends stepped back half a pace. Not dramatic. Just instinct. Creating distance, Daniel noticed. That was the moment panic flickered behind his eyes. He turned quickly, trying to regain ground. You went through my messages, he said, louder now. That's a violation. That's insane. There it was. Deflection, reframing, trying to make the focus about me. I nodded once. I confirmed something you were already telling other people. Clean, accurate, no extra weight. It landed harder than anything emotional would have, because it couldn't be twisted. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looked around the room, searching. For support, for alignment, for someone who would laugh and break the tension. No one did. Even his ex had stepped back slightly, her arms crossed now, expression guarded, detached, like she was reconsidering her position in real time. I didn't think it was that serious, she muttered. Not to me. To the room. To herself. Daniel turned toward her. You too? Too fast. Too defensive. She didn't answer. That silence cost him more than words. I stepped forward again. Not aggressively, just enough to reclaim the center. I was going to propose tonight, I said. A few people inhaled softly, the reality of what almost happened settling in. I had everything planned. I glanced briefly at the screen behind me, then back at him. But I'm not going to propose to someone who sees my vulnerability as content. The word landed. Content. Not partner. Not future. Content. Daniel laughed. Short, sharp, forced. You're acting like I was trying to destroy you, he said. It was a joke. People joke. His voice was louder now, but thinner. Like it needed volume to hold itself together. I didn't match it. I don't stay with someone who needs an audience to feel powerful. That was it. No speech, no dramatic buildup, just a boundary. Clear, immovable. Something in his expression shifted again, this time deeper. Not anger. Not yet. Loss of control. You're seriously ending this right now? He asked. For the first time, there was something almost real in his tone. Not remorse, but disbelief. Because this wasn't the outcome he had prepared for. I held his gaze. Yes. No hesitation. No softening. Just the truth. The room stayed silent. Heavy now. Not confused. Not curious. Resolved. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, then tightened again. He wasn't done trying. So that's it, he said. 2 years and you're just walking away? I let out a quiet breath, not emotional. Measured. I'm not walking away from 2 years, I said. I'm walking away from what you chose to do with them. That landed because it shifted responsibility completely. He opened his mouth again, closed it. There was nothing left to argue without admitting what he had done. A few people started picking up their things, not dramatically, just quietly, like the event had already ended. Because it had. Lena stepped toward me. I'm sorry, she said softly. I shook my head. You didn't plan this, she nodded. Stepped back. I turned slightly, closed my laptop. The screen went dark, simple, final. There's no proposal tonight, I said clearly. No one reacted. Because they already knew. I'll be ending the relationship effective immediately. Still calm. Still steady. And I'll need my key back by tomorrow. A few heads turned toward Daniel, waiting, watching. He didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved across the room again, counting, calculating, realizing. No one was stepping in. No one was defending him. No one was laughing. The performance had ended, and he wasn't the one controlling the final scene. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Quieter now. Almost controlled again. I nodded once. Maybe. A small pause, but it's mine to make. That was the last thing I said to him in that room. No insults. No accusations. No dragging it out. Just closure. I stepped away from the center. The space opened behind me. People moved. Not toward him. Away from the moment. The energy dissolved naturally, like something that couldn't hold itself together anymore. I thanked the manager. Settled the bill. Did the practical things. Because that's how I process endings. Not with noise. With completion. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because whatever had been there was already over. The drive home was quiet, not heavy, not overwhelming, just still. Daniel called 3 times before I even reached my street. I let it ring, not out of spite, out of structure. There was nothing urgent left to say. When I got home, I didn't sit down. I didn't replay the night. I moved. Closet first, then bathroom, Then the small things people forget. Chargers, books, the extra pair of shoes by the door. Anything that was clearly his, I placed into 2 boxes. Neatly. Deliberately. No hesitation. Then I changed my laptop password. Logged out of every shared account. Streaming services. Delivery apps. All the small access points people don't think about until they matter. It wasn't emotional. It was cleanup. About an hour later, there was a knock. Not aggressive, but persistent. I already knew it was him. I opened the door halfway, stepped into the hallway behind me, didn't invite him in. He looked different, less composed, hair slightly out of place, lower than usual. "You blindsided me," he said. I held his gaze. "You were planning to humiliate me days ago," I replied. "That's not a blindside." It landed immediately. Because it was simple. He exhaled sharply, ran a hand over his face. "That wasn't," he started, then stopped. Adjusted. Shifted tone. "I panicked," he said instead, "about everything. The pressure, the future." That was the first thing he'd said that sounded close to honest. Not complete, but closer. I nodded once. "Feeling pressure is normal," I said. Then, after a beat, "Planning a public rejection isn't." Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, just clear. He looked down at the boxes near the door, then back at me. "So what, we just don't get engaged?" he asked. "We slow it down. Keep dating." That was the moment I understood something fully. Not just about him, about us. If he could downgrade something that serious that easily, then we had never been aligned in the first place. I shook my head. "No." He blinked, like he hadn't expected the answer to be that simple. "I need a partner who protects me in rooms I'm not in," I said. Not louder, not softer. Just precise. Not someone who turns me into a moment. His expression shifted again. This time there was no defense, no argument. Just the realization that nothing he said next would change the outcome. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, held it for a second, then placed it in my hand. That was it. No dramatic goodbye, no final speech. Just a small, quiet transfer of something that used to mean access. Now it meant nothing. He picked up the boxes, hesitated. Like he wanted to say something else. Didn't. Then he walked away. The hallway felt different after he left. Not empty. Clear. The next morning, I woke up early, out of habit. For a second, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. And the feeling that followed wasn't grief. It was clarity. My phone lit up around 7. Messages from him. Long ones at first. Apologies, explanations, fragments of accountability mixed with deflection. By 9, the tone shifted. Frustration. Accusations. "You made me look bad. You could have handled it privately." I read every message once. Then I put my phone down. Didn't respond. He called. I let it go to voicemail. Twice. The recording said everything the text didn't. First one, soft. Regretful. Second one, sharp, irritated. 2 different versions. Same goal. Control. By noon, I made a decision. Not impulsive, not reactive. Final. I blocked his number. Then Instagram. Then everything else. Not to hurt him, to close the loop. Before blocking email, I sent one message. Short, direct. "I don't wish you harm, but I won't stay connected to someone who planned to publicly humiliate me." No extra words, no open doors. After that, I removed his name from my GDK contact at work, updated my lease, changed access permissions. Again, clean up. That evening, a mutual friend texted me, said Daniel wanted closure. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then replied once. Closure happened at the brewery. That was it. No follow-up. No explanation. 3 weeks have passed since that night. My routine looks the same. Work during the day. Gym in the evening. Groceries on Sunday. But it feels different. Quieter. Not empty. Just mine. A few mutual friends reached out. individually. Most of them didn't know what he had planned. They told me they were uncomfortable when everything unfolded, that they respected how I handled it. I didn't ask for validation. I didn't need it. The truth had been visible. That was enough. I heard through someone else that Daniel has been telling his version, that it was a joke, that I overreacted, that I embarrassed him. That's expected. I'm not chasing down every version of the story. The people who were in that room, they already know. What changed the most wasn't external. It was internal. I started replaying smaller moments, things I had dismissed. The competitiveness, the way he'd joke at my expense in front of others, then call me sensitive if I didn't laugh. None of it crossed a hard line on its own, but together, it formed a pattern. I just hadn't stepped back far enough to see it. That night forced clarity. Once I heard him describe my vulnerability as entertainment, there was nothing left to negotiate. No long conversations, no slow decline, just a decision. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Blocking him wasn't anger, it was prevention. No late-night apologies, no recycled promises, no reopening something that had already shown me exactly what it was. If there's one thing I understand now, it's this. Pay attention to how someone talks about you when they think you're not listening. That version is usually the most honest. I was ready to get down on one knee that night. Instead, I stood up. My name is Natalie Stone. I'm 34 years old, and I run a small online resale business based in Rotterdam. Most of my days run on structure, sourcing inventory, packing orders, answering messages, keeping everything moving so it actually makes money. In my world, hesitation creates problems. Small mistakes don't stay small. I used to think relationships worked the same way. I was wrong. My husband was Daniel Carter, 32. We had been together for 6 years, married for 3, no kids, a 2-bedroom apartment near the river, 1 shared car, a routine that looked stable enough that I stopped questioning it. From the outside, everything made sense. Inside, things worked differently. Daniel had a way of shifting conversations. If I brought up something simple, boundaries, time, respect, he didn't argue directly. He reframed it, made it sound like I was overreacting, like I was the one creating problems where none existed. He never needed to raise his voice. He just needed that expression. Slightly amused, slightly dismissive, like he already knew I was about to embarrass myself. The situation that started everything didn't look serious at first. About 4 months ago, Daniel mentioned his ex-girlfriend's birthday party. He said it casually, leaning against the kitchen counter like he was talking about a coworker's lunch break. I knew exactly who he meant. Lauren. They dated before me, and somehow never fully cut contact. Every time I questioned that, he said adults could stay friends, that it was normal, that I was reading too much into it. This time I asked why he needed to go. He said their old friend group would be there, that it would be rude not to show up. Then he added something that stuck with me. He said it might be awkward if I came. I remember pausing for a second, asking him what that was supposed to mean. He didn't hesitate. He said I had a habit of turning harmless social situations into interrogations. That bothered me more than the party itself. I told him I wasn't comfortable with him going alone to his ex-girlfriend's birthday, especially one I apparently shouldn't attend. He rolled his eyes, said I was proving his point about being insecure. For the next 2 days, he acted irritated with me, like I had accused him of something unreasonable, just by reacting. The night of the party, he left around 7, and the first thing I noticed was how dressed up he was, far more than what he had described. I pointed it out. He didn't even look at me when he responded. Men are allowed to look good without it turning into a trial. Then he walked out. He got home a little after 1 in the morning. I was still sitting on the couch, TV on, sound muted. The moment he walked in, something felt off. Not anything obvious. No physical signs. It was his posture, his expression. He looked defensive before I even said a word, like he had already prepared for an argument. At the time, I thought he was just expecting me to complain again. I didn't realize yet that he had a reason to prepare. He kicked off his shoes near the door, dropped his keys, moved straight toward the kitchen. I asked a simple question. Was the party good? He shrugged. Fine. then grabbed a bottle of water like the conversation was already over. I asked who showed up. That's when the irritation started showing. He said the usual people, old friends, then casually mentioned Lauren had been drinking too much. Acting emotional. The way he said her name, it was controlled, but he was watching me, measuring my reaction. I told him I was just curious how the night went since he got back late. That was when he gave me that look, the one that turns everything around. Are you seriously starting this at 1 a.m? I blinked. I just asked how it went. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, like he had been waiting for this moment. Then he said it. Quick, clean, prepackaged. Lauren tried to kiss me. I pushed her away. He said it like he was being honest before I even asked. Like transparency should end the conversation. I remember sitting there, processing. Then I asked the only thing that made sense. Why would that even happen? He rolled his eyes, said she had been drinking, got nostalgic, emotional, said it was embarrassing, and he shut it down immediately. Then he added something that stayed with me. It was just a kiss. Don't be so insecure. At that point, I hadn't even reacted yet. I told him the issue wasn't insecurity. The issue was that my husband went to his ex-girlfriend's birthday party without me, and somehow a kiss situation happened. He threw his hands up. Said this was exactly why he didn't want me there, because I turned normal situations into interrogations. Then he grabbed his phone, started scrolling. Conversation over. Or at least, that's what he wanted. But something about it didn't sit right. Not the story itself. The delivery. Too smooth. Too prepared. Like he had already decided exactly what version I was supposed to accept before he even walked through the door. I didn't push it that night. It was late, and pushing usually just led to him accusing me of ruining everything. But the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Coffee, phone, casual conversation, like the night before had been erased. I asked one more question over breakfast. Why would Lauren suddenly try something like that after all these years? He sighed, like I had asked something stupid. Said alcohol makes people act irrational. Said people get nostalgic. Then added that it was weird I kept bringing it up. That was his pattern. Ask once, acceptable. Ask twice, you're the problem. So I dropped it. For a few days, everything looked normal. He went to work. I ran my business. Life moved on. But something underneath it had already shifted. And about a week later, everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office packing orders when I got a message request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. Normally, I ignored those. My business page gets random messages all the time. Spam, questions, people trying to sell things I don't need. But the preview stopped me. I think you deserve to see this. That sentence did something physical to me. My stomach dropped before I even opened the message. The account looked real. Personal photos, normal posts, nothing fake or empty about it. I opened it. The woman introduced herself as someone who worked with Daniel. She said she had gone back and forth for several days about whether to send me anything at all. Then she said what Daniel told me about Lauren trying to kiss him wasn't what happened. Under the message, there was a video attachment. I stared at it for a full minute, maybe longer. Part of me already knew it was bad. People don't send messages like that to improve your day. Still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt for a few more seconds. Maybe it would show Lauren leaning in and Daniel pulling back, just like he said. Maybe it would look worse than it was. Maybe this woman had misread the situation. I opened the video. It was short, around 15 seconds. Shot on a phone in a crowded bar. Loud music, people packed close together. A long table covered in drinks and half-melted birthday candles. I spotted Daniel immediately. He was standing right beside Lauren. His arm was around her shoulders. Not casually, not politely, comfortably, like it had been there all night. They were laughing about something while people around them sang happy birthday. Then Lauren turned toward him, and what happened next erased every version of the story he had tried to sell me. Daniel kissed her first. Not a startled mistake. Not something random that happened to him. He leaned in on purpose. Slowly. Clearly. publicly. And it wasn't some awkward half-second slip either. It lasted. Long enough for the people around them to notice. Long enough for someone off camera to yell something about them getting back together. Then Lauren pulled him closer, and they kept kissing for another couple of seconds while people cheered. Cheered. That part stayed with me. Not just the kiss. The audience. The approval. The way it looked like something people had been expecting. The video ended right after that. I sat frozen at my desk with the phone still in my hand. Then I watched it again. And again, 3 times. Every replay made it worse. Not because I saw anything new, because I couldn't hide from what was already there. Daniel hadn't rejected Lauren. He hadn't pushed her away. He hadn't looked trapped or embarrassed or confused. He looked happy, relaxed, like he belonged in that moment. Then another message came through from the coworker. She said Daniel had told a completely different version of the story at work on Monday. Apparently, he'd made a joke out of it, like it was funny. Like kissing his ex at her birthday party was just one more story to laugh about over coffee. That was the moment something in me went very still. Not dramatic, not explosive, just clear. A kind of cold clarity that leaves no room for bargaining. Because the betrayal wasn't only the kiss. It was the drive home afterward. It was the rehearsed tone when he walked into the apartment. It was the way he looked at me, like he already knew what lie he was about to tell. It was the line about insecurity. That part bothered me more than anything else. He hadn't just lied. He had lied and then tried to position me as unstable for even caring. I locked my phone and set it face down on the desk. For about 30 seconds, I just sat there, listening to the tape gun on the table still slowly unwinding from the box I'd been sealing before the message came in. Everything around me looked exactly the same. Shipping labels, stacked inventory, a half-finished order, sunlight on the floor, but nothing in my life felt arranged the same way anymore. I picked up the phone again and watched the video one more time. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me still wanted to find ambiguity, a bad angle, a misunderstanding, something to soften it. There was nothing. It was clean. Ugly, but clean. He kissed her. Then he came home and handed me a prepared lie. And when I questioned it, he made me feel ridiculous. Once I accepted that, the next step felt obvious. I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and drove home. The apartment was empty when I got there. Daniel was still at work and wouldn't usually be back for another couple of hours. I walked inside and stood in the living room for a moment, just looking. Not because I was second-guessing myself, more because I could feel the shape of the place changing. The couch where he'd sat scrolling through his phone while telling me not to be insecure. The kitchen counter where he'd leaned like he was doing me a favor by admitting part of the truth. The hallway where his shoes were still kicked against the wall. Small things suddenly looked different when you understood who had touched them. I went into the bedroom and pulled 2 suitcases out of the closet. Then I started packing. I didn't throw anything. Didn't rage. Didn't damage a single thing. I moved quietly. Methodically. Shirts from the wardrobe. Jeans from the drawers, his shoes from the rack by the door, toiletries from the bathroom, chargers, belts, jackets, the watch case from the dresser. Anything that was clearly his went into the suitcases. The apartment stayed almost unnaturally quiet while I worked. That silence did something strange. It made everything feel more final. I wasn't performing anger for anyone. There was no audience, no speech, no tears. Just decision. At one point, I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the half-empty closet. That was when the practical side of my brain took over. The lease was in my name. I had lived there before the marriage. Most of the furniture was mine too. Legally and logistically, I didn't need to drag this out. I didn't need a week to think. I didn't need one more conversation where he'd twist the entire thing until I ended up defending my own reaction. I had already seen enough. So I stood back up and finished packing. By the time I was done, 3 large bags were lined up by the front door. His laptop bag sat on top of one of them. Neat, contained, ready. Then I sat on the couch and waited. Around 6:30, I heard his key in the lock. He walked in still in his work clothes, looking down at his phone. For a second, he didn't notice anything. Then he looked up, saw the bags, stopped. Actually froze. His eyes moved from the luggage to me, then back again. I could see the exact second his brain started trying to calculate what I knew. I didn't make him guess for long. I saw the video from Lauren's birthday. For the first time since I had known him, Daniel looked genuinely caught off guard. Not offended, not amused. Caught. He gave a short laugh that sounded wrong the second it left his mouth. Like even he knew it was too late for that tone. Then he said it was just a stupid kiss. Just like that. As if repeating the same line in a calmer voice would somehow make it smaller. I told him he had already lied about it once, and I wasn't interested in hearing a second version. Then I looked at the bags by the door and told him he needed to leave. That was when his face changed. The shock cracked. The anger underneath it stepped forward, and the room got very loud. What the hell is this? His voice snapped through the room before he even put his bag down. I didn't raise mine. I told you. I saw the video. For a second, he tried to recover. That same expression. The one he always used when he thought he could still control the direction of the conversation. He exhaled sharply, like he was already tired of me. It was just a kiss, Natalie. You're seriously doing all this over that? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I picked up my phone, opened the video, and held it out toward him. He hesitated, then looked. I watched his face as he recognized the clip. The exact moment it registered. Color drained, jaw tightened, eyes flicked away too quickly. He only watched a few seconds before turning his head. That was all it took. The denial didn't last long. It shifted, like it always did. Minimize, redirect, blame. It's not what it looks like, he said, already moving into the next version. I lowered the phone slowly. It looks exactly like what it is. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the living room. You're taking this completely out of proportion. There it was. The script. The same pattern I had seen 100 times before, but this time it didn't land the same way. Everyone was drinking, he continued. It was a stupid moment. The whole group was hyping it up. It would have been awkward to push her away like that. I held his gaze. You leaned in first. That stopped him. Just for a second. Then irritation replaced it. You're really going to analyze a 15-second clip like it's a crime scene? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of how predictable it sounded. No, I said calmly. I'm going to analyze the fact that you lied to me. He scoffed, shaking his head. I didn't lie. I simplified it. I stared at him. Simplified? It didn't mean anything, he snapped. You're acting like I cheated on you. The word hung there. Cheated. Like he needed to redefine it before I could. You kissed your ex, I said, in public. Then came home and told me she tried to kiss you. And when I questioned it, you told me I was insecure. His expression hardened. You are being insecure. That was the moment something inside me settled completely. Not cracked. Not hurt. Settled. Like a final piece clicking into place. I nodded once. Then I pointed at the door. Take your things and leave. For a second, he just stared at me, like he expected a different ending. Like this was the part where I would raise my voice, cry, argue, give him something he could work with. When I didn't, the volume came from him instead. You're throwing away a marriage over one stupid moment? I didn't move. The moment wasn't the kiss, I said. It was everything after. He laughed, but it sounded forced. You're being dramatic. I'm being clear. That irritated him more than anything else. Clarity doesn't give people space to argue. You always do this, he said, voice rising. You take something small and turn it into something huge. I shook my head slightly. No, you take something real and try to make it small. That hit. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened, so he pushed harder. That video doesn't show anything about what actually happened that night, he said. You don't know the context. I know enough. You don't, he snapped. You're choosing to believe some random person over your own husband. I held his gaze. I'm choosing to believe what I saw. That shut him up for about 2 seconds. Then he pivoted again. Who even sent that to you? He demanded. That's the real issue here. Someone's trying to cause problems. I didn't answer because it didn't matter, and he knew it didn't matter, which is why he kept talking. If you had trusted me like a normal wife, none of this would even be a problem. There it was. The sentence. The one that made everything simple, not easier, clearer. Because in that moment, it wasn't about the kiss anymore. It was about expectation. He expected to be trusted without being honest. Expected to be defended, even against evidence. Expected me to ignore what I saw, just to maintain the version of reality that worked for him. I stood up, walked past him, opened the front door. The hallway light spilled into the apartment. Then I stepped aside. Take your things. He didn't move at first, just stared at me. Like he was still waiting for me to back down. When I didn't, the anger came back stronger. He grabbed one of the suitcases and dragged it across the floor, the wheels catching slightly on the edge of the rug. You're going to regret this, he said, not even looking at me. I leaned against the wall, arms relaxed. I won't. He let out a short, sharp laugh. People in real relationships work through things. I didn't respond. Normal couples don't throw each other out over something like this. Still nothing. That silence followed him as he hauled the second bag out into the hallway. He kept talking. Not to understand, not to fix anything, just to fill the space. You've always been controlling, he added, voice tight. This just proves it. I watched him, calm, because arguing would only turn it into what he wanted, a debate he could reshape. This wasn't a debate. It was a decision. He came back for the last bag, stopped near the door, looked at me like he wanted the final word, like he needed to walk away believing he had still won something. A normal wife would have laughed that off, he said. I met his eyes. A normal husband wouldn't have lied about it. That landed harder than anything else I had said. For a second, he didn't have a response. Then he grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the noise stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, just quiet. I locked the door, walked back to the couch, sat down. Not to rethink anything, just to let it settle. The apartment felt different, not empty, clear. The next morning, I started with the practical steps. I called a lawyer, explained everything. No kids. No shared property beyond basic household items. Clean situation. By the end of the consultation, the process had already started. After that, I blocked his number. Blocked him on every platform. No long messages. No explanations. No back and forth. As far as I was concerned, it was done. For the next 3 months, I didn't hear a single word from him. Then one night, around 9:30, someone started pounding on my door. Not knocking. Pounding. Hard enough that it echoed through the hallway. For a second, I thought it might be an emergency. A neighbor. Something urgent. I walked over and looked through the peephole. It was Daniel. 3 months. No contact. No messages. Nothing. And now he was standing there, hitting the door like he was trying to break it down. His hair was messy, his expression wild. He paced back and forth between pounding again. I didn't open it. Instead, I spoke through the door. What do you want? That only made him louder. Natalie, open the door. We need to talk. His voice carried down the hallway. Sharp, urgent, angry. I stayed where I was. There's nothing to talk about. That's when the yelling started. You ruined everything. His voice slammed against the door hard enough that I could feel the vibration through the wood. I didn't ruin anything, I said evenly. You need to leave. That only made him louder. No, you don't get to do this, he snapped. You don't get to throw me out and then act like you're the victim. I leaned slightly closer to the door, not touching it. I'm not acting like anything. I made a decision. There was a sharp, frustrated exhale on the other side. Then pacing, fast, uneven. You filed for divorce without even trying to fix anything, he continued. That proves you never cared about this marriage. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I needed to think, because I had already heard every version of this argument before, just rearranged with different words. You had 3 months, I said. You could have handled everything through a lawyer. Silence. Not complete, but quieter. Like that hadn't been the direction he expected. Then his voice came back, tighter. That's not the point. It is the point. Another pause. Then his tone shifted, less explosive, more desperate. "You embarrassed me," he said. "Do you even understand that? Everyone knows. You made this into something it didn't need to be." I let that sit for a second, because that sentence explained more than anything else he had said. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about control, about image. "You kissed your ex in a room full of people," I said. "I didn't make that public." He didn't respond right away, so I continued. "You lied about it, then tried to make me feel insecure for noticing." The hallway went quiet again. "Then, that was nothing," he snapped suddenly. "People do worse all the time and move on. Normal couples don't destroy everything over one mistake." There it was again. Normal. That word he kept reaching for, as if repeating it would make his version of reality more valid. I looked down at my phone in my hand, unlocked it slowly. "If you don't leave," I said calmly, "I'm calling the police." That stopped him. For a few seconds, nothing. No pacing, no knocking, just silence. Then a lower voice. "You're really going to call the police on your own husband?" I tilted my head slightly, even though he couldn't see it. Ex-husband. The shift was immediate, like something snapped back into place. "You're unbelievable," he said, louder again. "You destroyed everything over one stupid moment, and now you're acting like I'm some kind of threat?" I didn't answer, because the conversation wasn't moving anymore. It was looping, and I had no interest in going in circles. So I tapped the screen, started dialing. I said it out loud. "I'm calling now." He heard it. I knew he did, because the noise outside stopped again, completely this time. The line connected. I explained the situation in a calm, steady voice. Someone outside my apartment, refusing to leave, causing a disturbance. While I spoke, I listened. At first, nothing. Then a faint sound, fabric shifting, a bag dragging lightly across the floor. Then footsteps, slower this time, moving away from the door, toward the elevator. I stayed where I was, finished the explanation, then paused. Listened. The hallway stayed quiet. I looked through the peephole, empty. I told the dispatcher the situation had resolved and apologized for the call. Then I hung up, locked the door again, checked it twice, and walked back to the couch. For a few minutes, I just sat there, phone still in my hand, not shaken, just aware. He hadn't come back to fix anything. He hadn't come back to apologize. He came back because something in his life had gone wrong, and he needed somewhere to put that, somewhere familiar, somewhere he assumed would still be available. Me. I leaned back against the couch and let out a slow breath. The quiet in the apartment settled again, the same kind of quiet from 3 months earlier. But this time, it felt different, stronger, because now there was confirmation, not just of what he did, but of who he was when things didn't go his way. I didn't hear from him again after that night. No messages, no new numbers, no attempts to explain or rewrite the story, just silence. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt like space. Stop. Not from him. About 2 weeks later, I heard the final update. Not from him. From someone who used to be part of his friend group. We weren't close, but word travels, especially when a situation unravels publicly. From what I was told, things with Lauren hadn't gone the way he expected. They had seen each other a few times after the party, hooked up. Enough for him to assume something was rebuilding, something familiar, something he could step back into. But Lauren didn't see it that way. For her, it had been a moment, a night, maybe a short phase, nothing more. She moved on quickly, and when she did, everything he had been leaning on disappeared with her. That's when he started talking, telling people he regretted how things ended with me, that he had made a mistake, that it had been blown out of proportion, that I had overreacted. The story kept shifting depending on who he was talking to, but the pattern stayed the same. Minimize, deflect, reframe. By then, it didn't matter, because regret after the fact doesn't change the moment that caused it. The reality was simple. He chose to kiss his ex at her birthday party. Then he came home, looked me in the eye, and lied. Not just the lie itself, the way he told it, the way he delivered it like a prepared script, the way he turned it around on me like I was the problem for questioning it. That was the moment everything ended. Not when I packed his bags, not when he walked out the door. That part was just logistics. The ending happened earlier, in the space between what I saw and what he expected me to believe. Looking back, removing him from the apartment that same day was the cleanest decision I could have made. No long arguments, no drawn-out conversations, no weeks of pretending things might go back to normal. Just a line. Clear. Final. And the 3 months of silence that followed only confirmed it. Because people who actually want to fix something don't disappear until they need something again. They don't come back angry. They come back accountable. That difference matters. Life after that got quieter, not empty, structured again, like it used to be before I started questioning my own reactions. Running my business became easier, clearer. No constant tension in the background. No conversations that left me second-guessing what I had just heard. Just consistency, and that's enough. So that's the whole situation. My husband went to his ex-girlfriend's birthday party, kissed her, came home and told me she tried to kiss him, called me insecure when I questioned it. Someone who was there sent me the video. I packed his things, told him to leave, and ended it. 3 months later, he showed up at my door screaming because his life hadn't gone the way he expected. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a chef in San Jose. My schedule is predictable but intense. Early mornings for prep, long nights on the line, and weekends when most people relax are usually my busiest shifts. I like the structure. Kitchens run on timing and discipline, and I've always believed life works better when you apply the same rules. That was true long before Daniel. Daniel Hayes is 31, my boyfriend. Or at least he was. We had been together for a little over 3 years and living together for most of that time in a small apartment near downtown that I originally rented before he moved in. On paper, everything made sense. We had routines, shared responsibilities, wedding plans that filled most of our weekends, venues, guest lists, quiet arguments about details that didn't really matter, but somehow felt important at the time. From the outside, we looked stable. Daniel had a way of making things feel polished, confident, charming, the kind of man who could walk into any room and immediately control the tone of it. People listened to him. I used to think that meant he was grounded. Now I think it meant he was persuasive. Daniel had always been drawn to self-improvement trends. Not casually, not as hobbies. Each one became his entire worldview. There was a phase where everything had to be organic, then breathwork sessions, then something he called emotional recalibration. Each phase came with new rules, new language, new ways he believed people were supposed to live. I adapted. At least, I tried to. About 3 months before our wedding, he found someone new. Her name was Victoria. He called her a spiritual advisor. Mid-40s, soft voice, always dressed like she was halfway between a retreat and a performance. The kind of woman who spoke slowly, like every sentence carried hidden meaning. Daniel started seeing her for what he called guidance sessions. At first, I didn't question it. In my world, people deal with stress however they need to. If talking to someone helped him feel more balanced, I had no reason to interfere. But within a month, it stopped being occasional. Twice a week, then more. He started quoting her, not casually, like facts. If I disagreed with anything, he would tilt his head slightly, almost amused, and say I was too stuck in linear thinking to understand deeper emotional alignment. That tone, it wasn't aggressive. It was worse. It was dismissive, like I wasn't even operating on the same level anymore. I remember one night I was sitting at our table reviewing catering logistics for the wedding. He walked in, dropped his keys, and stood there for a moment like he had rehearsed something. Then he said it. Calm. Measured. He needed space. Not a break. Not a conversation. Space to determine if we were truly meant to be together. At first I thought he meant a weekend. maybe staying with a friend, something temporary. But then he walked into the bedroom and started packing. A suitcase, not a bag, not something symbolic. A full suitcase. Clothes, shoes, toiletries. He moved with quiet certainty, like the decision had already been finalized, somewhere I wasn't included. I stood in the doorway watching him. "Where are you going?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "With Victoria." The words landed strangely, too calm for what they meant. He explained it like it was reasonable. She believed couples should separate before marriage to test their emotional independence. He said it like he was explaining a recipe, like this was a step. Necessary. Logical. Then he added one more thing before zipping the suitcase. I shouldn't contact him for a week, because outside pressure could disrupt the process. I remember standing there, feeling something shift inside me. Not explode. Not break. Just shift, like something quietly falling out of alignment. For the first hour after he left, I thought it was temporary. A dramatic version of something couples go through all the time. But later that night, standing in my kitchen, prepping vegetables for the next day, something changed. When you work as a chef, your hands move, even when your mind is somewhere else. I must have chopped through crates of onions without really seeing them. And somewhere between one repetition and the next, the situation stopped feeling complicated. It became simple. My boyfriend had just left for a week with another woman. He told me not to contact him, and he expected me to respect that. I didn't call him. The next morning, I woke up at 5, went to work, and moved through the day like nothing had happened. Kitchens are loud, fast, demanding. They don't leave space for personal distractions. No one there knew what was happening, and I didn't tell them. Around midday, Daniel texted me once. He said he had arrived safely, that this process was important, that Victoria believed the separation would reveal whether our connection was real or just habit. I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I locked my phone and went back to work. Something inside me had already started changing. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Over the next couple of days, I started looking at the situation the same way I would evaluate a broken system in a kitchen. When something fails during service, you do not panic. You check the inputs. Then the outcome. Input 1. My boyfriend left for a week with another woman. Input 2. He told me not to contact him while they were together. Input 3. He framed the entire thing as emotional growth and expected me to support it. The outcome felt obvious. By the third day, I stopped feeling confused. I stopped even feeling angry in the usual way. Anger is loud, hot, reactive. What settled over me was colder than that. Clarity. I called the wedding venue first. The woman on the phone sounded polite, practiced, like she had handled this kind of call before. I asked about the cancellation policy. She explained it calmly. Deposits were non-refundable. The date would be released immediately unless I wanted to reschedule. I told her that wouldn't be necessary. Then I called the caterer, which felt strange considering I work in food myself. Then the photographer, the DJ, the rental company Daniel had insisted on for the table settings and decorative pieces he said would make the whole thing feel elevated. Every call was almost identical. The wedding was no longer happening. Please cancel the booking. That was it. No emotional speech. No public breakdown. No dramatic confrontation in the background. Just short phone calls, confirmation emails, and polite voices telling me what money was already gone. I had always imagined canceling a wedding would feel explosive. Instead, it felt administrative. A list. A sequence of tasks. A private dismantling of something that had once seemed solid. The venue manager was the only one who sounded even slightly personal. She paused after I confirmed the cancellation and asked if I was sure. I said yes. Then she lowered her voice a little and said she was sorry. What struck me most was not the sympathy. It was the lack of surprise. As if weddings ending before they begin were not unusual at all. As if people build entire futures on unstable ground every day and only notice when the floor gives out. By the fourth day, nearly everything was closed out. The venue was gone. The photographer was gone. The rentals were gone. The date itself, the one we had spent months organizing our lives around, no longer belonged to us. And through all of it, I stayed calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I was. But the hurt had moved somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. It was underneath everything now, like a current I didn't need to touch directly to feel. The only people I hadn't told yet were our families. I waited until Friday evening after my shift. My parents live about an hour away, so I called them first while sitting in my car outside the restaurant. The parking lot was mostly empty by then, the kind of tired silence that settles in after a long service. I told them what happened without trying to shape the story. Daniel had left for a week with a woman he called his spiritual advisor. Because of that, I had canceled the wedding. There was a long pause. Then my mother asked the most practical question possible. Did he think he could just come back and continue planning? Her voice wasn't emotional, just careful. I stared through the windshield for a second before answering. I think so, I said. Or he didn't think I'd do anything. My father came on next. He listened. Then he exhaled through his nose in that quiet way he does when he's angry but trying not to show it. Finally, he said, "You probably saved yourself a divorce." That conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. No lecture, no pressure, no insistence that I calm down and reconsider. Just recognition, just relief, hidden inside disappointment. Calling Daniel's parents was harder. Not because I doubted my decision, because I knew they were about to hear something absurd and humiliating about their son, and there was no version of the truth that would make it sound better, his father answered. I told him the same basic version. Daniel had taken a week away with Victoria, a woman he considered a spiritual guide. Because of that, I had canceled the wedding. Silence. Not brief silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to tell you the person on the other end is trying to rearrange reality into something they can understand. Then he asked, very carefully, "He left with her?" "Yes." Another pause. He said he would speak to Daniel when he came back. I thanked him, even though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because there was nothing else left to say. By the time Sunday arrived, the apartment felt different. Not sad exactly. Just stripped down. Quieter. Cleaner in a way that had nothing to do with actual clutter. There was less tension in the air, less performance. I moved through the rooms and noticed little things I hadn't paid attention to before. The decorative objects Daniel had chosen, the expensive candles he liked because they made the place feel curated, the books about transformation and self-actualization stacked on the side table as if they had all been placed there to signal something. The apartment still looked like ours, but it no longer felt like a shared future. It felt like a space waiting for a final correction. Daniel still hadn't contacted me again, not once. No check-in. No curiosity, no question about how I was doing or whether canceling everything might cross my mind. And that was when the last part of the situation became clear. He had left expecting to return, not hoping, expecting. He thought this week would become one more chapter in his personal evolution, one more story he could tell about growth and emotional courage and how our relationship had survived because he had been brave enough to test it. He had no idea that while he was away finding clarity, I was dismantling the life he assumed would still be here. He came back the following Monday evening. I knew the exact moment because I was in the kitchen finishing dinner prep when I heard his key in the lock. For half a second, I considered stepping away before he walked in. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't feel like giving him the version of this moment he probably expected. The relieved reunion. The tense but manageable conversation. The part where he explained everything. And I listened, but I stayed where I was. It was still my apartment, and I had nothing to avoid. The door opened. He stepped inside, carrying a small suitcase and a tote bag, like someone returning from a thoughtful little reset, not like a man who had vanished for a week with another woman 6 weeks before his wedding. He looked rested. That was the first thing I noticed. Rested. Centered. Like he had gone away to improve himself and had come back expecting the world to appreciate the effort. His eyes moved across the room once, and then he smiled faintly. "The apartment feels lighter," he said. That was his first sentence. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "Thank you for giving me space." The apartment feels lighter. I stared at him for a moment, And in that moment, I understood something so clearly, it almost felt cruel. He had absolutely no idea what had happened while he was gone. He set the suitcase down near the wall and started talking immediately. The retreat had been transformative. Victoria had helped him process emotional blocks that had apparently been affecting our relationship. The space away from me had given him clarity. He spoke in calm, even sentences, with the quiet confidence of someone delivering good news. I leaned against the kitchen counter and listened for maybe 2 minutes. Then he said the sentence that made the whole thing snap into focus. He told me he was ready to move forward with the wedding now that he had done the work. Not once during that explanation did he ask what I had been doing all week. Not once did he ask how I felt about him leaving with another woman for 7 days. Not once did he speak like my experience mattered as much as his. From his perspective, this had all been a temporary exercise. An uncomfortable one, maybe, but useful, necessary, manageable. And now that he had returned with his new insight, life was supposed to resume. That was when I interrupted him. I told him the wedding was canceled. He laughed, not loudly, just a short, dismissive sound, like I had made a dry joke he wasn't sure deserved a full reaction. Very funny, he said, reaching for a glass in the cabinet. I'm serious, Emily. I think we can actually... I already canceled it. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That was when he stopped moving. The glass stayed in his hand, but his attention shifted fully toward me. For a second, he just looked at me, waiting for the moment where I would soften the statement, clarify it, turn it into something less absolute. When that moment didn't come, the expression on his face changed. Not confusion, irritation. You're being dramatic, he said. I let that sit for a second. Then I repeated it. The venue is canceled. The vendors are canceled. Both families have been informed. There is no wedding. The words landed heavier the second time. More real, more irreversible. He set the glass down slowly. You made that decision without talking to me? That question. It almost surprised me. Not because it was unreasonable in general, because of the context he had somehow erased. You left for a week, I said, with Victoria. You told me not to contact you. He exhaled sharply, like I was missing something obvious. That wasn't the same thing, he replied. That was part of a process. The way he said process felt rehearsed, like something he had repeated enough times that it no longer needed explanation. I watched him for a moment, trying to understand how two people could be standing in the same room with completely different versions of reality. You disappeared with another woman 2 months before our wedding, I said. That's not a process. That's a decision. He shook his head immediately. Nothing inappropriate happened. He said it quickly, firmly, like the accusation itself offended him. Victoria is a mentor, he added. You're reducing it to something it wasn't. I didn't argue that part, because whether something happened or not wasn't the point. The point was what it looked like. The point was the choice. A supportive partner would have trusted the space, he continued, his tone shifting into something more controlled. That's what this was about. Growth, alignment. There it was again, that language. Detached, polished, empty. I felt something tighten slightly in my chest, but it wasn't panic. It was recognition. The week, if anything, it had made him more certain of himself, more convinced that his perspective was the only one that mattered. He nodded, like he was ready to clarify something for me. Did you think leaving for 7 days with another woman right before our wedding wouldn't affect my decision to marry you? He didn't hesitate. No, he said, because the whole point was to test whether our connection could handle independence. The answer came too fast, too clean. Like he had never actually considered the possibility that it might not. If you trusted me, he added, you would have respected that. Trusted. That word echoed for a second. Not because it was wrong, because of how easily he used it to shift responsibility from his actions to my reaction. I let out a slow breath. The wedding is already canceled, I said. That part isn't a discussion. He stared at me, and for the first time since he walked in, something unsettled flickered across his face. Not regret. Not guilt. Disruption. like the situation had moved outside the boundaries he expected. "You're reacting from ego," he said after a moment. I almost smiled at that. Almost. "Victoria warned me this might happen," he continued. "When one person starts doing deeper work, the other sometimes resists because it threatens the old dynamic." I leaned back slightly against the counter. It was strange. Listening to someone who had never met me diagnose my behavior through him. "You canceled the wedding," he said, his voice tightening just a little, "because you're uncomfortable with change." "No," I replied. "I canceled it because you left." That silence again. But this one was sharper, more fragile. I could see him recalculating, trying to reframe it in a way that made sense within his version of things. "Then we can fix it," he said finally. "We can rebook everything. This doesn't have to be permanent." That was the moment something in me settled completely. Not shifted. Settled. "No," I said. "Just that." No explanation, no elaboration. And that was when the tone changed. Completely. The calm disappeared, replaced by something quicker, sharper. "You don't get to make that decision alone," he snapped. I didn't move. "You already made yours," I said. That hit. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his posture changed, just slightly, like he was bracing against something he hadn't planned for. "I was trying to improve our relationship," he said, his voice rising now. "Most people would appreciate that. Most people wouldn't leave with someone else a week before their wedding," I replied. He took a step forward, not aggressively, but with intent. "You're twisting this," he said. "Nothing happened." I didn't say it did. Then what's the problem? There it was. That question, genuine, in a way that almost made it worse, like he truly couldn't see it. "The problem," I said slowly, "is that you chose someone else's guidance over basic respect for the relationship you were already in." That was the moment he snapped. The restraint disappeared. "That's insecurity," he shot back. "That's exactly what I've been trying to move past." His voice was louder now, not controlled anymore. "You embarrassed me," he continued. "You canceled everything without even talking to me. Do you know how that looks to our families?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. "You left," I said again. But this time, I didn't raise my voice to match his. I didn't need to. He started pacing. Back and forth across the living room, his hands moving as he talked faster now. "Do you have any idea how rare it is for someone to actually do this kind of work?" he said. "To look at themselves honestly?" I watched him for a second. Then I realized something important. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a loop. The same points, the same language, the same refusal to step outside his own narrative. Working in kitchens teaches you something about moments like this. When things get loud, chaotic, repetitive, it's already past the point of being fixed. He kept talking, the volume rising, the words coming faster. And somewhere in the middle of it, I made the next decision. "Pack your things," I said. He stopped. Mid-sentence. "What?" "You need to leave." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. "You can't be serious," he said. I walked past him into the bedroom without answering. The closet door was still half open from when he packed earlier. I reached inside, grabbed one of his suitcases, and brought it back into the hallway. Set it down. That sound, the wheels hitting the floor, did something. It shifted the room, made everything real in a way words hadn't. "You're overreacting," he said, but there was something different in his voice now. Less certainty, more edge. "I'm ending the situation," I replied. He stared at the suitcase, then back at me, like he was waiting for hesitation, for doubt, for me to undo what I had just done. But there wasn't anything to undo. "Emily," he said, slower now, "you're going to regret this." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, because there was nothing left to say. After a few seconds, he turned and walked into the bedroom. The next part happened quickly. Drawers opening, hangers hitting the floor, the sharp sound of things being moved without care. Anger, but contained, focused. I stayed in the kitchen, gave him space, not out of kindness, out of finality. He passed by once, carrying clothes, not looking at me. Then again, grabbing things from the bathroom. The noise filled the apartment for about 20 minutes. Then it stopped. He dragged the suitcase into the hallway, picked up the bag he had brought back earlier, and stood by the door, waiting for something. A conversation, a reversal, a reason. "Is this really how you want it to end?" he asked. I looked at him, and for the first time since he walked back in, I felt completely certain. "It ended when you left," I said. He shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand," he murmured. "Victoria was trying to help us." I walked to the door, opened it. He hesitated for a second, then stepped into the hallway. "You're throwing this away because you're afraid to grow," he said. I didn't answer. I just closed the door behind him, locked it. And that was the last time I saw him, for almost 2 months. Life got quieter after Daniel left. Not empty, just simplified. The first couple of weeks didn't give me much time to think anyway. The restaurant was heading into a seasonal menu change, which meant longer hours, supplier meetings, and constant testing. New dishes, new timing, new pressure. Kitchens don't pause for personal drama. If anything, they absorb it. There is always something immediate that needs your attention, something precise, something that cannot be delayed just because your personal life has shifted. And I leaned into that. Early mornings became earlier. Nights stretched longer. By the time I got home, I was too tired to replay conversations or question decisions. Most people in my life already knew the wedding had been canceled, so there weren't many explanations left to give. When friends asked what happened, I kept it simple. "Daniel left for a week with someone he called a spiritual advisor," I said. That told me everything I needed to know. That answer usually ended the conversation. No one asked follow-up questions after that. Because there weren't many interpretations that made it sound better, weeks passed. No messages, no calls, no attempts to explain or correct the situation, which, in a strange way, made things easier. Silence can feel like confirmation. Confirmation that the decision you made didn't just make sense to you. It made sense to reality. About 6 weeks in, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for closure, not even for him to come back. Whatever version of my life had included Daniel had already been replaced by something else. Something quieter, but steadier. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. I was in the middle of prep, hands covered in flour, moving through orders without thinking too much about anything beyond the next step. I didn't check it right away. When I finally did, the name on the screen made me pause. "Daniel." The message was simple. He asked if we could talk. Said he had been doing a lot of reflection, that the last couple of months had given him clarity about our relationship. I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I locked my phone again and went back to work. Not because I didn't care, because I wasn't sure what there was left to say. Later that evening, when the kitchen had quieted down and the last orders had gone out, I checked my phone again. There was another message, longer this time. He said things had gotten out of balance while he was working with Victoria. That leaving the way he did might have been unfair. Might have been. That phrasing stood out. Careful, measured, still slightly distanced from full responsibility. Then he said he wanted to meet, to see if there was any way we could repair what had happened. That part made me pause, because the last time I had seen him, he hadn't believed anything was broken. Now, suddenly, he was talking about repair. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I kept it simple. "When?" His reply came almost immediately. That alone told me something. He said he could come by the apartment that evening if I was available. I read that line twice. Not meet somewhere. Not neutral ground. My apartment. Like the last 2 months had been a temporary interruption. Like the door was still open, waiting for him to walk back through it. I shook my head slightly. Then I responded. "We can talk. Not here." There was a short pause before his next message. Then he suggested a cafe near the restaurant. We agreed on the next day. The place was small, quiet. The kind of cafe people go to when they want conversation without interruption. I got there a few minutes early, sat down, ordered coffee, and waited. When he walked in, I knew immediately something had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His posture was different, less certain, less composed. The confidence he used to carry so effortlessly felt reduced. He spotted me, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked over. When he reached the table, he didn't sit right away. He looked at me like he was trying to read something. Then he sat down. "Hi," he said. I nodded. "Hi." There was a brief silence. Then he started talking before I even touched my coffee. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about everything that happened." I didn't interrupt. "I handled things badly," he continued. "The way I left, it wasn't fair to you." Again, that careful phrasing. Not wrong, but not fully direct either. He went on. Said the retreat had made him realize some difficult things about himself, that he had gotten too caught up in external guidance, that letting someone else influence major decisions about our relationship had been a mistake. I listened, watched. Not just what he said, how he said it. There was less certainty now, more pauses, more searching for the right words. For the first time, he sounded like someone unsure of his own narrative. "I should have talked to you," he said finally, "before I made that decision." That was closer. Closer to something real. He leaned forward slightly. "I don't expect things to just go back to how they were," he added. "I know that's not realistic." I waited. "But maybe we could start over," he said, slowly. "See if we can rebuild." There it was. The offer. Carefully presented, measured. He wasn't asking to resume the wedding. Not directly. He was asking for access, for another chance to step back into the space he had left. I took a sip of my coffee before responding. Then I asked him one question. "Are you still working with Victoria?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "That ended a few weeks ago." I held his gaze. "Why?" Another pause. "I realized I needed to focus on real life," he said, "not constant introspection." That answer explained more than he probably intended. Victoria had been the authority before. Now she wasn't. And suddenly, he was here, looking for stability again. He kept talking. Said he missed what we had, missed living together, missed the structure. At one point, he even said I had always been the most grounded person in his life. That part almost felt ironic, because a few months ago, that same groundedness had been something he dismissed. Something he said held him back. Now it was what he wanted again. Finally, he said it. "Could I come back?" he asked. "Not move in right away, just spend some time together, talk more." There it was. Clear, direct, like the last 2 months had been a detour, like we could step back into something familiar if we both agreed to it. I set my cup down, and for a moment, I just looked at him. Not the version of him sitting across from me now, the version of him standing in our apartment 2 months ago, calm, certain, explaining why leaving with another woman was necessary, expecting me to understand, expecting me to wait. Then I looked back at him and made my decision. I told him no. I didn't hesitate, didn't soften it, didn't wrap it in something easier to accept. Just no. For a second, he didn't react, like the word hadn't fully registered. Then his expression shifted. Not anger this time, something quieter. Disappointment, maybe, or the realization that this wasn't going to follow the path he had expected. "You're sure?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yes." He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me. "People make mistakes," he said. "Relationships survive worse things than this." I let that sit for a moment, because technically, he wasn't wrong. Some relationships do survive worse, but that wasn't the point. "The problem isn't just what you did," I said. He frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" "It's how you saw it." He didn't interrupt, so I continued. "When you left, you didn't think you were risking anything," I said. "You thought you were right." His jaw tightened just slightly. "You came back expecting everything to continue," I added, like nothing had actually changed. He looked down at the table for a second, then back at me. "I didn't realize." "I know," I said, cutting him off gently. "That's the problem." Silence. Not uncomfortable, just final. And now, I continued, the person who convinced you that you were right is gone. So you're here, wanting stability again. That landed. I could see it. Not because he argued, because he didn't. He opened his mouth slightly like he was about to respond, then stopped. I watched that moment carefully because it told me more than anything he had said so far. He wasn't here because everything had suddenly become clear. He was here because something external had shifted. And now he was adjusting. Again. I've changed, he said finally. Maybe he believed that. Maybe part of it was even true. But I shook my head slightly. I have too, I said. That seemed to catch him off guard. You're not the same person you were, he said. No, I agreed. I'm not. I let a small pause settle between us. 2 months ago, I continued, I was sitting at our table planning a wedding while you packed a suitcase to leave with another woman. His eyes flickered. Just for a second. That version of me would have waited, I said. Would have tried to understand. Would have given you space and hoped you came back with answers. I leaned back slightly in my chair. But I'm not her anymore. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt accurate. Simple. Clear. He exhaled slowly, looking down at his hands. So that's it? He asked. Yes. Another silence. This one heavier. Not because there was more to say, because there wasn't. He nodded once, slowly, like he was accepting something he couldn't change. I didn't think it would end like this, he said. I believed him. Not because the situation was unpredictable, because he had never actually considered this outcome. I did, I replied. That made him look up. Not defensive, just surprised. I just didn't say it out loud at the time. We sat there for another minute. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet aftermath of a decision that had already been made long before this conversation. Finally, he stood up. I stayed seated. He hesitated for a second, like he was about to say something else. Then he didn't. Take care, Emily, he said. You too, I replied. And that was it. No hug. No attempt to hold on to the moment. No last-minute shift in direction. He turned and walked out of the cafe. This time I took a slow sip and sat there for a few seconds, letting the quiet settle. Not relief, not sadness, something steadier than both. Clarity. When I left the cafe a few minutes later, the street outside looked exactly the same as it always did. People walking. Cars passing. Nothing, but something in mine had. Not because he came back, because I didn't let him stay. Looking back now, canceling the wedding during that week he was gone felt abrupt at the time. Now it just feels like the simplest decision I made in the entire situation. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 34 years old and I work as an operations analyst for a logistics company just outside Denver. My life has always followed structure. Early mornings, clean spreadsheets, predictable routines. I like things planned, clear, calm. That was true long before Ethan. Ethan Cole is 31, my fiancé, or at least he was. We had been together almost 4 years, engaged for 9 months, living in a rented townhouse that looked exactly like the kind of place people post when they want their life to seem settled. Wedding scheduled for early fall, deposits paid, save the dates already sent, families involved. On paper, everything made sense. Ethan had a way of making things look polished from the outside. He was confident, quick with words, the kind of man who could step into any room and immediately control the tone of it. People liked him. They trusted the version of him they saw. I used to be one of them. In private, things were different. Not explosive, not dramatic, just subtle shifts. If something didn't align with how he saw himself, he didn't argue directly. He reframed, adjusted the narrative until somehow I was the one overreacting. I didn't notice how consistent that pattern was until it was already too familiar. And then there was Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, 32. Known him since college. She existed in the background of everything, not in obvious ways, just constant ones. Late-night messages that made him smile at his phone. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Stories that always started with, You had to be there. I never accused him of anything, never asked him to cut her off. I trusted him. Or at least, I told myself I did. Until the night he mentioned the trip. He said it casually, like it was already decided, scrolling through his phone, barely looking at me. Vanessa and I might take a few days, just out of state, nothing serious. I remember the exact way the room felt in that moment. Quiet. Too quiet. I asked him to repeat it. He did. Same tone, same ease. Then he glanced up and asked, "Why are you so quiet?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse. I just said calmly, "I'm not okay with that." He blinked. Not defensive, not apologetic. Just surprised that I had drawn a line. I told him clearly. Traveling alone with your ex while we're engaged, that crosses a boundary for me. I even offered alternatives. Invite other people, change the plan, go another time. I stayed calm on purpose because I wanted this to be a conversation, not a fight. He didn't argue right away. He smiled, shrugged, said we'd talk later. That night, he stayed up longer than usual, phone in hand, typing. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Messages, notifications. That's when I saw it. Ethan had posted a photo, him in our kitchen, coffee in hand, calm expression, like nothing had happened. The caption said, "Some women think love means control. Freedom scares them." No name. But it didn't need one. It had been less than 12 hours since I said I wasn't okay with the trip. The comments filled up fast. Support. Applause. People praising him for standing his ground. Vanessa commented almost immediately. "Funny how independence looks like a threat to the wrong person." He pinned her comment. I remember staring at the screen longer than I should have. Not shocked, just clear. He hadn't just dismissed me. He had moved the conversation somewhere I couldn't follow. Not our home, not a private discussion. The internet. When he walked out of the bedroom, he acted like nothing was wrong, asked if I was making coffee, then looked at me and said, "What?" Like my reaction was the problem. I told him I saw the post. He shrugged, said it wasn't about me unless I made it about me. That was his move, always. Say something directed at me, then make me feel irrational for recognizing it. I told him again, calmly, that this wasn't control. It was a boundary, that we could figure something out together. He laughed, not warmly, dismissively, called me insecure, said marriage would be hard if I needed constant reassurance. Then he said Vanessa was basically family, and I should be grateful he even told me about the trip. That part landed differently, because it wasn't honesty. It was a warning. I asked him one question. If I planned a trip alone with someone I used to be involved with, would you be okay with that? He didn't hesitate. That's different. I asked how. He said, because I trust you to understand context. Then he looked back at his phone, smiling again. Notifications still coming in. Validation stacking in real time. I didn't argue after that. I didn't raise my voice. I just stopped. And that silence unsettled him more than anything else I could have said. He kept glancing at me, waiting for a reaction, a fight, something he could respond to. I gave him nothing. I walked to my laptop instead, opened the folder labeled wedding, venue contract, catering agreement, photographer timeline, all the things I had managed quietly while he focused on how everything looked. He hovered behind me after a few minutes. "What are you doing?" "Checking dates," I said. He frowned. "Why?" I looked at him. "Are you still going on the trip?" He said yes, then maybe. Then said he wasn't going to cancel his life because I felt threatened. Each answer slightly different. Testing. Pushing. Waiting for me to react. I didn't. That's when his tone changed. He said I was being cold, that I was punishing him, that this was emotional manipulation. Then he snapped. "Maybe we shouldn't even get married if you're like this." I looked at him, held his gaze, and said, "Maybe you're right." That was it. No argument, no explanation. I turned back to the screen and kept reading. He stood there for a few seconds, waiting for something more. When it didn't come, he scoffed, like he had won something, and walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I packed. Quietly. Only what I needed. Clothes, documents, my laptop, things that were actually mine. I didn't slam drawers, didn't wake him. Before I left, I took off my engagement ring, placed it on the kitchen counter, right where he would see it first. Then I opened my phone, changed my relationship status to single. No caption, no explanation, just the fact. And then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and drove away. For the first time in weeks, I slept. By the time Ethan woke up, I was already gone. I knew exactly how it would happen. First the ring, then the empty space in the closet, then the relationship status. He would notice each one separately, and with each new detail, his version of events would lose another layer of control. I woke up in a hotel room on the other side of town, with my phone vibrating so hard against the nightstand, it sounded like something alive trying to escape. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, notifications stacked so tightly they blurred together. His first text was simple. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The second came less than a minute later. "Where are you?" Then another. "Are you seriously doing this?" After that, the messages started changing shape, fast. Accusation, anger, confusion, outrage. He said I was trying to scare him. He said this was immature. He said I was being cruel. Then he said I was humiliating him. That one stood out. Not hurting him, not disappointing him, humiliating him. Because people were already seeing the status change, already asking questions, already noticing that something had shifted without his permission. I didn't reply. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the screen, and felt something in me settle instead of shake. That was the strangest part. I should have felt panic. I should have felt grief. Instead, I felt still, like my body had finally stopped bracing for an argument that had been going on for months in different forms. By mid-morning, he started posting. The first one was vague, a line about how silence can be the most manipulative form of control. People reacted exactly the way he wanted them to. Concern, support. Little declarations about how real men don't disappear. He didn't tag me. He didn't need to. Everyone who mattered knew. Then he noticed I had not only left, but changed the status publicly. That pushed him into a different kind of spiral. He texted again, this time demanding that I change it back. Not because he wanted me back. Not because he was sorry. Because people were asking questions. Because I was making him look abandoned. I read that line twice. Look abandoned. Even then, his focus was still image, still performance, still optics. I set the phone down and started making calls. Venue first, then caterer, then photographer. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me too. I kept every sentence short. The engagement has ended. Yes, I understand the deposit is non-refundable. That's fine. Please cancel the booking. Each confirmation email that landed in my inbox felt both heavier and cleaner, like cutting ropes one by one. Painful. Necessary. Real. Somewhere around noon, he figured out where I was staying. I still don't know how. Maybe a shared account. Maybe a friend at the front desk who recognized his voice and made a mistake. Maybe he guessed based on old conversations. It didn't matter. What mattered was the sound. Not knocking. Banging. Hard enough that I heard another door open across the hall, then shut again. He called while he was outside my room. My phone lit up in my hand as his fist hit the door again. "Clara," he shouted. "Open the door." I didn't move. He called again. Then messages started coming through in real time. "Open the door. This is ridiculous. Stop hiding." I sat on the bed and stared at the wood grain on the dresser across from me. I could hear him pacing now. Could hear the anger rising because the audience was gone. No comment section. No pinned support. Just a locked door and no response. Then his voice changed. Louder. Sharper. the kind of volume meant for strangers to overhear. He started saying things that weren't for me. How cruel I was. How he couldn't believe I was punishing him like this. How I was refusing to communicate like an adult. It was almost theatrical. And that was when it became painfully obvious. If I opened that door, nothing would change. He would not come in and suddenly understand. He would not sit down and listen. He would fill the room, reframe, escalate, push until I reacted, then use the reaction. The locked door wasn't avoidance. It was the boundary, maybe the first real one I had ever enforced with him. After a while, the pounding stopped, then the pacing, then silence. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. You're unbelievable. Then, I hope you're proud of yourself. Then nothing. He finally left. I waited a full 10 minutes before I even stood up. My hands were cold, but my chest felt strangely steady. That was the moment I knew I was done. Not emotionally done. That part takes longer. But decision made, done. No more negotiating with someone who only respected limits when he couldn't get past them. Once he left the hotel, his tone online changed again. Anger sharpened into language designed to sound deeper than it was. Posts about emotional abandonment. Captions about women who weaponize silence. Quotes about how independence threatens insecure partners. The words escalated quickly. So did the comments. And right there, again, was Vanessa. Loud. Visible. Supportive in exactly the way she had always been. Anyone who treats him like that never deserved him. That comment stayed up for hours. A small thing, maybe, but not small enough. Because now the shape of the situation was becoming visible to people who had not wanted to see it before. I still said nothing publicly. Instead, I emailed our landlord. I explained that the engagement had ended and asked what the process would be for removing myself from the lease early. I checked the penalties. The number hurt, but not enough. Money is expensive. Peace is more expensive. By afternoon, mutual friends started reaching out, not all at once, one by one. Careful messages. Are you okay? What happened? Did you really leave? Some of them sounded concerned. Some sounded curious. A few sounded like they had already heard Ethan's version and were trying to compare it against my silence. I answered only 2 people, both friends I trusted. I kept it simple. We disagreed on boundaries. I ended the engagement. Nothing more. No screenshots. No explanations. No attempt to win anyone. And even with that little, something started shifting. Because people already knew about the trip. Not from after the fight, from before. Several friends had heard him talk about it casually, like it was already decided, like my opinion had never been part of the plan. One of them told me that directly. I sat with that for a long time. Not because it surprised me, because it clarified everything. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He had already built a version of the future where I would simply absorb it. Smile. Adapt. Stay quiet. That night, he sent a long message. Different tone. Less rage. More emotion. Or at least the appearance of it. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said I forced him into a corner. He said posting was how he processed things. He said if I had just talked to him, none of this would have happened. I read it once. Slowly. Then a second time. Not because I doubted myself, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't missing the apology. I wasn't. There was regret, maybe, but only for consequence, not for choice, not for disrespect, not for humiliation, just for what my leaving had done to his life. I blocked his number. No speech, no closure, no warning. Just removed the access. That should have been the end of direct contact. It wasn't. Around midnight, he posted again. A quote this time. Something about strong men being punished for wanting freedom. No tag, no name. But the pattern was becoming obvious now, even to people who had once applauded him. The next morning, the cancellation emails kept arriving. Venue confirmed. Catering confirmed. Photography confirmed. The wedding was officially gone. That was when it became real in a way the ring on the counter hadn't been. A ring can be explained away. A fight can be reframed. A missing fiancé can be turned into a story. But a canceled venue is administrative truth. By the end of that day, his attempts to reach me started sounding different. Not angry, not confident. Desperate. But they weren't coming from him anymore. They came through other people. His sister messaged me asking if I would please just talk to him. A mutual coworker said Ethan wasn't doing well, and maybe I could show some compassion. Another friend asked if there had been some misunderstanding that could still be fixed. I didn't argue with any of them, didn't defend myself, didn't explain the post, the trip, the hotel, the pounding on the door. I just repeated the same sentence in slightly different forms. The engagement is over. I'm not continuing contact. That was all. The simplicity of it made people more uncomfortable than a dramatic explanation would have. Because drama gives everyone a role. A simple ending does not. He still didn't stop. Emails started coming in. Long subject lines. Longer bodies, paragraphs that swung wildly between apology and accusation. I feel discarded. I can't believe you would abandon me like this. Blocking me is cruel. If you really loved me, you wouldn't shut me out. That line kept appearing. If you really loved me, never I crossed a line. Never I disrespected you. Never, I'm sorry for humiliating you in public. Just conditions, requirements. A test I was still expected to pass, even after leaving. I created a filter and sent every email from him into a folder I would not open. Not because I was weak, because I knew exactly how the cycle worked. All it would take was one late night, one tired moment, one sentence written just well enough to make me question my own memory. I was done offering him access to my uncertainty. A few days later, I heard from mutual friends that he was unraveling, not quietly, loudly, showing up places unannounced, retelling the story over and over, changing details depending on the audience. In some versions, I was cold. In others, controlling. In others, emotionally unstable. But in every version, he was blindsided. And in nearly all of them, Vanessa was right there beside him, supporting him, defending him, posting with him, filling the space I had left so quickly, it would have been humiliating if it weren't already so obvious. I didn't feel jealous. That would have required believing she had taken something from me. What I felt was something flatter. Exhaustion, maybe. The kind that comes when reality finally matches what your instincts have been trying to tell you. Toward the end of that week, I went back to the townhouse during work hours to collect the rest of my things. He wasn't there. The place already looked different. A picture moved. Blank space on a shelf. Decorations shifted. It was subtle, but I could feel it. He was rewriting the environment the same way he rewrote everything else. I took what was mine, left what wasn't, didn't linger. That night, an unknown number called me. I let it ring. Then voicemail. His voice. Crying. Soft at first, then breaking. He said he didn't understand how everything had collapsed so fast. I listened to that line in silence. Fast. That word again, as if this had been sudden, as if the collapse began when I left. It didn't. It began the moment he chose an audience over a conversation. And by then, even if he still didn't understand it, I did. By the end of that week, something subtle started to shift. Not loudly. Not in a way you could screenshot or point to and say, there, that's the moment everything changed. It was quieter than that. People talk, especially when two versions of a story don't line up. Especially when one person is posting constantly and the other says almost nothing. That contrast started doing work I never asked for. A mutual friend called me one evening. Careful tone, measured words. She said Ethan had been telling people I disappeared without warning, that I refused to communicate, that I punished him for wanting independence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. I just listened. Then she hesitated and added something else. He's not really mentioning the trip anymore. That part mattered because other people remembered. They remembered him talking about traveling with Vanessa weeks before anything happened. Casually, confidently, like it was already decided, like my agreement was just assumed. And when those details started resurfacing, the tone around him shifted. Not dramatically. No one confronted him outright. But there were pauses now, side glances, less automatic support. He felt it. I could tell. Because his posts changed. They got shorter, less confident, less polished. The quotes stopped sounding like declarations and started sounding like defenses. He stopped talking about freedom, started talking about betrayal, about abandonment. He wanted sympathy now, not applause. Vanessa stayed close, closer than before, too close. She started appearing in photos that were clearly meant to look casual. A coffee cup across from his, a reflection in a car window, a caption that made no sense unless you knew the inside joke. It wasn't subtle, and it didn't land the way they expected, because people noticed the timing. People asked questions. One comment stayed up just long enough for screenshots. Isn't that the same girl from the trip you were planning? Gone within minutes. But the damage doesn't disappear just because the comment does. Ethan tried reaching me again. Different email this time. Short, stripped of the long explanations. Can we talk like adults? I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was tempted, because I could see the shift. He was adjusting strategy. Less emotion. More reason. Trying a version of himself that might sound more acceptable, but the core hadn't changed. The question wasn't about accountability. It was about access. I didn't reply. That silence said more than anything I could have written. A few days later, I heard he lost one of his groomsmen. No argument, no confrontation, just distance. Then another. People stepping back quietly, not because they were choosing sides, because they didn't want to stand in something that didn't feel stable anymore. That's how it started collapsing. Not all at once, piece by piece. And the strangest part was how calm I felt watching it from a distance. I wasn't relieved because he was hurting. I wasn't satisfied. If anything, I felt detached, like watching something inevitable finally reach the point you always knew it would. I went back to work. Same routines, same structure, but everything felt different. Lighter, maybe. Not because the situation was easy, because I was no longer carrying something that had been quietly exhausting me for a long time. The practical consequences started landing for him next. He told his parents the wedding was off, but not the real reason. From what I heard, he framed it as me being overwhelmed, needing space, not ready for commitment, a softer version, one that protected him, one that kept the narrative intact. His mother called me that night. Her voice was calm. Careful. She asked if I was okay. I told her the truth. Not the details, not the posts, not Vanessa, just the core. We weren't aligned on boundaries or respect anymore. There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said quietly, "That makes sense." That was it. No defense, no argument, just acknowledgement. A few days later, Ethan tried something different. He started talking about money, about how hard it was to suddenly handle everything alone, how unfair it was that I left him with the apartment, that I created a mess and walked away from it. He left out the part where we had split the lease, where he had insisted on that townhouse because it looked right, where the extra cost had always been justified by appearances. Reality doesn't adjust for aesthetics. The landlord approved my removal from the lease. I paid the penalty, signed the paperwork. From that moment on, the place was entirely his responsibility. That hit him harder than anything else so far, because numbers don't argue. Bills don't reframe. They just arrive, and they don't care who looks good online. He showed up at my office once, not inside. Outside, standing near the parking lot like he expected me to walk into him. A coworker texted me before I even saw him. I stayed inside. Watched the time pass instead. Eventually, he left. Later that day, HR sent me a message saying they were aware of the situation and would handle it if needed. That embarrassed him. more than anything else so far, because that wasn't social. That wasn't narrative. That was official. After that, the story he told people shifted again. Now I was cold, calculated, someone who had planned this, someone who punished instead of loved. The words got sharper, but fewer people were listening. The wedding website went offline. Registry links disappeared. Guests quietly adjusted travel plans. No announcements, no dramatic posts, just absence. The future he had been building publicly started dissolving in small administrative ways. And the more that future disappeared, the clearer something became. He wasn't grieving me. Not really. He was grieving the version of his life that had already been performed. The photos, the timeline, the validation. That was what was slipping through his hands. And the more it slipped, the harder he tried to hold on to anything that still looked like control. Vanessa stayed, longer than anyone else, long enough that people stopped seeing her as background and started seeing her as the obvious next step. That shift made people uncomfortable because it answered a question no one had wanted to ask directly. Apparently, the trip never happened. Too many eyes on it. Too many questions. Too many raised eyebrows. Suddenly, it wasn't about freedom anymore. It was about optics, and the optics were bad. He tried one more time to reach me. Through a friend, a message passed along carefully. He said he just wanted closure, that he needed one conversation to understand how everything fell apart so fast. That word again, fast. I told the friend no. No explanation, no condition, just no. Because there was nothing left to clarify. A few days later, I heard he had to move. The townhouse was too expensive on one income. The same place he insisted on because it looked right. Because it fit the image. He downsized. A smaller apartment across town. No announcement. No photos. Just quiet. And that quiet followed him. Not hostile. Not dramatic. Just indifferent. People stopped asking how he was doing. Group chats went silent. Invitations slowed. Support didn't disappear all at once. It faded. And when it faded, there was nothing underneath it to hold him up. That was when I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. He didn't lose me. Not in the way he thought. He lost the version of himself that only existed when everything looked perfect. And without that, he didn't know who to be. I watched all of it from a distance. Not involved, not reacting, just aware. And the distance made something else clear. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't destruction. It was correction. Once the noise around him started fading, the reality underneath it became harder to ignore. There was no audience left to absorb it. No comment section to soften it. Just consequences. Quiet, steady, unavoidable. I didn't hear about everything directly. It came in fragments. Small updates from people who didn't mean to report anything, just mentioning things in passing. That situation with Ethan sounds messy. He's not really himself lately. Things seem off. The details filled themselves in over time. Vanessa was still there. Of course she was. At first, she looked like support. Consistent. Present. Loyal. The kind of person who stays when things get uncomfortable. But over time, that presence started to feel different. Less like support. More like permanence. And that changed how people saw it. When I was still there, she had a role, background, history. A connection that existed before me, but stayed respectfully behind the relationship. Once I was gone, that structure disappeared. Now she was just there, front and center. And people started asking the question they had avoided before. Not out loud, but in the way conversations pause, in the way tone shifts, in the way curiosity replaces assumption. How long had that dynamic really been like this? Ethan tried to maintain control of the narrative. He kept posting, but less frequently, more carefully, less confident. He shared things about moving on, about rebuilding, about learning hard lessons. But even those posts felt rehearsed, like he was trying to land on a version of himself people would accept again. It didn't work the way it used to, because once people see inconsistency, they don't unsee it. And once they start questioning, they don't stop. The financial pressure hit him harder than anything emotional ever could. That part I understood, because it's immediate, concrete, unavoidable. The townhouse had never been practical. It had been chosen for how it looked, the layout, the lighting, the way it photographed. Now it was just expensive and empty. When I signed off the lease, it became his alone. No sharing. No buffer, just numbers. And numbers don't care about narrative. They don't respond to charm. They don't adjust for ego. They just add up. I heard he tried to negotiate, tried to buy time, tried to stretch things out. But eventually, reality closed in the way it always does. He had to leave. The move wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No post. No attempt to spin it. Just a quiet transition from something that looked like a future into something smaller, more contained, more real. Vanessa helped him move. That detail came from someone who didn't realize how much it said without meaning to. She was there the whole time. Of course she was. At that point, it would have been stranger if she wasn't. But that visibility changed things again, because now there was no distance left to interpret. No ambiguity. No space to pretend it was anything other than what it looked like. And people noticed. They didn't confront him. They didn't accuse. They just adjusted, pulled back, changed how they engaged. Less enthusiasm, less involvement, less belief. He tried reaching me again. Different approach. A message sent through someone who knew me well enough to be careful with the wording. He's not doing well. He just wants to talk. He says he understands things better now. That last part stayed with me for a moment, not because I believed it, because I recognized it. Understanding, in his case, had always come after consequence, after something was already lost, after the situation no longer required him to act differently. I asked one question. Did he say what he understands? There was a pause. Then the answer came back. He just wants a chance to explain. I didn't respond after that, because explanation had never been the problem. Clarity had never been missing. He had understood enough in every moment that mattered. He just hadn't chosen differently, and that was the only part that counted. A few days later, I heard something else. He had tried to reconnect with some of the people who had distanced themselves, reached out, invited them out, tried to reestablish normalcy. Some responded. Most didn't. And the ones who did kept it surface level. Careful, polite, distant. Because once trust shifts, it doesn't return to its original form. It changes shape, sometimes permanently. Vanessa stayed consistent, but even that started to look different over time, because consistency isn't the same as stability, especially when it's built on a situation that replaced something else. I heard they were spending more time together, more openly, no longer pretending it was incidental, no longer framed as just support. And that clarity didn't strengthen his position. It exposed it, because now people could trace the timeline more easily, see the overlap, see the proximity, see how quickly one presence had filled the space of another. It didn't require accusation. It spoke for itself. At some point, he stopped trying to control how it looked. That was the real shift, not acceptance, not growth, just exhaustion. The kind that comes when maintaining an image takes more effort than letting it go. And when that happened, the post slowed, then stopped. No more quotes, no more indirect messages, no more attempts to shape perception, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence than mine. Mine had been deliberate, grounded, final. His felt empty, like something had run out, and there was nothing left to replace it with. I didn't feel anything watching that happen. No satisfaction, no relief. Just distance. Because by that point, it wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about what he lost, or what he understood, or what he was trying to fix. It was about what I had stepped out of, what I had stopped participating in. And the more time passed, the clearer that became. This wasn't a dramatic ending. There was no moment where everything exploded in forced resolution. It unraveled, quietly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left holding it together. And the strangest part was, that was exactly how it had been held together in the first place. Not by strength, not by mutual understanding, but by my willingness to absorb things without forcing them into the open. Once that stopped, everything else followed. The ending didn't arrive all at once. There was no final confrontation. No moment where everything snapped into clarity in front of an audience. It settled. Slowly, like something heavy finally finding its place after being held up for too long. By then, the wedding no longer existed in any real sense. The venue was gone. The caterer canceled. The photographer released the date. Guests had already adjusted their plans without needing a formal explanation. What had once been a shared future had turned into a list of closed accounts and confirmation emails. And the strangest part was how quiet it all was. No dramatic announcement, no public closure, just absence. Ethan tried for a while to keep something of it alive. Not the relationship, the image. He told people different versions depending on who was listening. That we needed space, that timing wasn't right, that things had become too intense. Each version softened the truth just enough to make it easier to say out loud. But the more he spoke, the less people asked. Because at a certain point, repetition stops sounding like explanation and starts sounding like avoidance. Vanessa remained. That part didn't change. If anything, it became more visible, less filtered, less careful. They were seen together more often, not accidentally, not in passing, deliberately. And yet, it didn't land the way either of them might have expected. There was no excitement around it, no curiosity, just a quiet kind of understanding. The kind people don't say out loud, but don't question anymore, because the timeline had already answered it. I heard they tried to define whatever it was, turn it into something stable, something that made sense after everything. But stability built on replacement always carries something underneath it, something unresolved, something unfinished. And people can feel that, even if they don't name it. Eventually, even that stopped being something others talked about, because the attention moved on. It always does. That's the part no one thinks about when they choose the audience over the conversation. The audience leaves. And when it does, you're left with whatever is actually real. I didn't hear from him again after that. No messages, no attempts, no indirect contact. Not because he didn't want to, because there was nothing left to reach. No opening. No access, no version of me still waiting to respond. And I think at some point he understood that. Not all at once, not in a moment of clarity, but gradually, the way everything else unfolded, piece by piece. I rebuilt my life in ways that didn't look dramatic from the outside. Same job, same routines, but different weight, different energy. The absence of constant negotiation felt unfamiliar at first. Then necessary, then normal. I didn't replace him. That was never the goal. I didn't need to prove anything. Not to him, not to anyone watching, because the truth was quieter than that. The relationship didn't end because of one post, or one trip, or one argument. It ended because of a pattern, a consistent, subtle pattern, where boundaries became accusations, where discomfort was reframed as insecurity, where respect was optional as long as the image stayed intact. And once I saw that clearly, there wasn't anything left to negotiate. When I left the ring on the counter, when I changed my status, when I canceled the wedding, it might have looked sudden from the outside. It wasn't. It was the first time I acted in alignment with something I had been recognizing for a long time. He thought I was trying to control the narrative, that I was punishing him, that I was making a statement. What he didn't understand was I had stopped participating in it completely. Watching everything that followed wasn't satisfying. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't closure in the way people expect. It was distance. The kind that comes when something no longer has the ability to pull you back in. And with that distance came something else. Clarity. Not about him. about myself, about what I was willing to accept, what I wasn't, what love actually requires when it's real. It's not constant agreement. It's not control. It's not performance. It's restraint. The choice not to cross certain lines because you understand what you're protecting. He wanted freedom without friction, without limits, without consequence. I wanted something different, something that required both people to recognize where the line was and choose not to step over it. Those two things don't coexist, not for long. I'm no longer engaged. The wedding is gone. The version of the future I thought I was building doesn't exist anymore. But for the first time in a long time, what I have now feels like mine. Not something I'm maintaining, not something I'm adjusting to fit someone else's narrative. Just mine. And that difference, quiet as it is,